Welcome, friend. As you settle into bed tonight, allow your imagination to wander back in time, far from the rush of modern life. Tonight, we will travel back in time to a quiet country village in rural England, in the late Georgian era, in the 18th century, where a small inn stands at the edge of a winding road. Its walls are built of stone, warmed by the sun during the day, and at night a gentle glow seeps out from its windows, spilling golden light across the lane. The air outside is cool and damp with evening, but inside the kitchen is alive with warmth, rhythm, and the comfort of daily routine. Before we begin, be sure to like, share, and subscribe, only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It's super amazing how there are so many viewers across the world who enjoys this type of content. Please be sure to drop a comment below to let me know what part of the world you're listening from. I would truly appreciate that. Now lay back, relax, maybe have some wine with a cozy blanket, and let's travel together, way back together. Inside the inn's kitchen, the hearth dominates the far wall. Logs shift and crackle, flames licking around iron pots that sway gently on their hooks. A deep pot of stew simmers steadily, sending out waves of savoury fragrance. Onions softened until sweet, carrots releasing their earthy flavour, and herbs floating on the surface, their green oils perfuming the air. The scent is rich, but not overwhelming, the kind of aroma that makes the body relax as if it has known this meal many times before. The innkeeper moves quietly about, her steps steady on the worn wooden floor. She sets down a basket filled with round loaves of bread, their crusts browned and still faintly warm from the afternoon bake. The surface of each loaf carries small cracks, and when one is tapped with a finger, it answers with a hollow sound that promises a soft interior. She brushes flour from her apron absent-mindedly, humming under her breath, not with any melody in particular, but with the low and soothing murmur of habit. At a nearby table, a younger helper slices turnips into thin half-moons, the knife tapping against the wooden board in an unhurried rhythm. With every cut, a crisp scent of raw vegetables rises into the air, mingling with the steam of the stew. She pauses from time to time to tuck a stray strand of hair behind her ear, or to sweep the offcuts into a small bowl for tomorrow's broth. The sound of the blade is steady, a small metronome against the softer backdrop of the fire, and the occasional whistle of wind through the chimney. The shelves along the wall are crowded but orderly, earthenware jars filled with dried beans, bunches of thyme and rosemary tied with twine, sacks of barley resting against the stone wall. Some of the jars are faintly smudged with flour, others sealed carefully with wax. Each one carries the silent promise of meals to come. Copper pans hang from hooks above, their surfaces dulled by time yet catching a faint glimmer from the firelight. The kitchen is not grand, not polished, but it is steady, dependable, the kind of room where the simplest ingredients transform into lasting comfort. The inn's back door creaks open with a familiar groan, letting in a gust of cool evening air. A villager enters, delivering a basket of fresh eggs, their shells a patchwork of browns, creams, and pale blues. He sets them carefully on the table, tipping his cap before retreating back into the night. The eggs are cool to the touch, faintly speckled, still carrying a trace of straw from the henhouse. The innkeeper smiles to herself as she checks them, satisfied, and arranges them gently into a bowl by the hearth where the warmth will take off their chill. As the evening stretches, the rhythm of the kitchen deepens. The stew thickens, sending up lazy bubbles that break the surface with soft plops. The bread loaves are sliced, their crusts crackling faintly under the knife, releasing steam that carries the smell of yeast and warmth into the room. A pat of butter, golden and slightly softened, rests on a wooden plate, waiting to melt against the fresh slices. The helper pauses her work, pours herself a ladle of broth into a small cup, and blows gently before sipping. Her shoulders ease as the heat spreads through her hands, her face illuminated by the fire's glow. The door to the dining room swings open just a fraction, and a faint stream of lamplight spills into the kitchen. The murmur of voices drifts in, guests speaking in soft tones, their words indistinct, broken only by the occasional laugh muffled by the wooden walls. The inn itself is no place of grandeur, but it serves travellers and locals alike, and the kitchen is its quiet heart. Tonight, a handful of villagers have gathered after their day's labour. Some take their places by the fire in the dining room, while others lean back in chairs, boots stretched toward the warmth. Their presence lends the building a sense of steady life, but here in the kitchen, the pace remains calm, unhurried, untroubled. The innkeeper moves to a tall cupboard near the corner and draws open its wide doors. Inside are rows of simple crockery, bowls glazed in pale colours, chipped at the edges but sturdy and useful. She selects a stack, carrying them carefully to the table where a serving ladle rests. With practiced ease, she places each dish upon a tray, lining them up with a rhythm that makes no sound louder than the creak of the wood beneath her feet. The helper joins her, setting spoons beside the bowls, polished until they reflect tiny glimpses of firelight. Every movement has its place, every task a gentle repetition learned over years. At the hearth, the pot of stew is stirred once more. The ladle dips beneath the surface, dragging through thickened broth that clings with richness. Each stir brings up morsels of meat and softened vegetables, glistening with flavour. The scent grows stronger now, carrying across the kitchen and into the dining hall, where it earns a quiet hush from the tables as the guests grow more expectant. It is a scent that signals rest, nourishment, and the ease that comes after work is done. On the far wall, a window is cracked open a finger's width, letting the cool night air slip in. It mingles with the warmth of the room, making the air fresh, as though the kitchen itself breathes. Beyond the glass, the village lies still, lanterns glowing faintly in the lanes, the distant sound of hooves fading as a cart rolls slowly away. The inn sits as though set apart from time, its walls keeping out the darkness while the kitchen holds its pool of steady light. The helper, finished with her chopping, wipes her hands on her apron and turns her attention to the table again. She lays out a small basket of apples, their red and yellow skins glowing in the lamplight. She polishes each one with a cloth, not out of necessity but habit, arranging them so the colours alternate in pleasing pattern. A jug of milk, cool from the cellar, is lifted onto the table beside them, the clay handle rough beneath her fingers. The jug sweats faintly in the warmth, droplets gathering and running in slow trails down its side. Above the hearth, an iron hook holds a kettle filled with water, and soon its low murmur joins the chorus of the kitchen. It does not whistle yet, only hints at rising steam, a promise of tea that will be poured once the guests have finished their meal. The innkeeper, listening with half an ear, knows the sound well. She checks the bread basket again, covers the slices with a clean cloth to hold in their warmth, and nods to herself, satisfied. The kitchen is not silent. No kitchen ever is. But its sounds are the kind that soothe rather than disturb. The shuffle of feet across wood, the hush of fabric brushing against stone, the sigh of the fire as another log collapses into glowing coals. Even the occasional clink of pottery is softened, absorbed into the rhythm of the night. Each sound layers upon the other, creating a pattern of gentle noise, steady enough to lull the mind and loosen the tightness of thought. And as the night unfolds, the inn remains a place apart, humble, ordinary, yet endlessly comforting. The kettle above the fire begins to rattle more insistently, its lid clicking as the steam builds. The innkeeper lifts it carefully with a thick cloth, moving it to the edge of the hearth where the heat is gentler. She pours a little into a chipped teapot lined with dried leaves, chamomile, with its faint golden hue and scent of apple blossoms. The fragrance curls into the air, light and calming, drifting across the kitchen like a whisper of spring despite the cool night beyond the walls. At the long wooden counter, the younger helper begins kneading a ball of dough for tomorrow's bread. Though the day is nearly finished, preparations for the next one have already begun. Her palms press firmly into the soft surface, folding it, turning it, folding it again. Each motion is steady, unhurried, a quiet labour that feels more like a rhythm than a task. The dough creaks faintly under pressure, releasing the yeasty aroma of flour and water brought together. With each push, the board beneath her dusts up a fine cloud of flour, catching the glow of firelight in pale golden motes. Across the room, shelves stacked with crockery and jars catch the glow in patches. Their shadows overlap on the stone wall, making the kitchen seem deeper, almost endless in its calm. One of the shelves holds a cluster of onions braided together by their stems, their papery skins rustling faintly whenever the door opens. Another shelf cradles bottles of oil, their surfaces dim with a thin film of dust, but their contents rich and waiting. Everything in its place speaks of sustenance, not extravagance, Nothing wasted, nothing rushed. The innkeeper returns to her task, reaching for a wooden bowl filled with dried peas. She tips them into a small pot, the tiny shapes pattering against the bottom like soft rain. They will soak overnight, she knows, and become tomorrow's soup, simple but hearty. She sets the pot near the edge of the hearth where the heat will not boil it, only warm the water enough to coax the peas into readiness. The room fills with a steady sense of continuity, today flowing gently into tomorrow, each meal preparing the way for the next. The younger helper pauses in her kneading, flexing her fingers before dusting them with flour once more. She glances toward the small square window set high into the wall. The glass is clouded, but beyond it, faint specks of starlight shimmer against the dark. For a moment she leans on her elbows, listening to the muffled murmur of voices in the dining room. Then, with a small sigh that carries no weight of worry, she returns to her dough, folding and pressing until it yields to her touch. Near the fire, a cat has curled itself upon a low stool, its fur rising and falling with each slow breath. It does not stir at the noise of the pots or the motion of the women. It is accustomed to the bustle of the kitchen. Its whiskers twitch from time to time as if in dream, and its tail curls tighter with the warmth of the flames. The soft presence of the animal adds another layer of calm, as though the kitchen itself has given shape to its rest. The butter churn standing in the corner is cleaned and polished, its work done for the day. The innkeeper checks it with a practised glance, nodding at the neatness of it. A crock of fresh butter sits nearby, wrapped in cloth, cool and golden. She dips a knife into it briefly, spreading a thin layer onto a slice of bread, and sets it aside on a plate for anyone who might wander in later in need of a small bite. Hospitality, she believes, lies in the small gestures no one sees until they need them. The night deepens beyond the walls, but here time feels suspended. The fire, the food, the quiet tasks, all of it creates a rhythm that seems as endless as it is gentle. The kitchen does not close in on itself, but continues steady and soft like a lullaby built from wood, stone, and flame. The meal has been served, the trays carried away through the dining room door, and the kitchen begins to exhale into a quieter rhythm. The innkeeper moves first to the hearth, adjusting the iron hook so that the heavy stew pot is eased back from the flames. The fire still burns strong, but its edges are softening, logs collapsing into glowing embers that will give off steady warmth long into the night. She stirs the pot once more, though only out of habit, and leaves the lid slightly ajar so the steam can drift into the air. The smell, once rich and commanding, now settles into a background comfort, as though the kitchen itself has been steeped in broth. The helper gathers the used utensils and sets them in a wide wooden basin. The clink of spoons and ladles echoes briefly in the room before being swallowed by the hush of the fire. She fills a jug from the kettle and pours hot water over the pile, the surface bubbling and releasing faint wisps of steam. A bar of soap rests at hand, cut into rough squares, its scent clean but earthy. She scrubs slowly, dipping and rinsing, her motions unhurried, the sound of water joining the room's quiet music. Droplets patter back into the basin, steady as rain against a window. The table is cleared next, crumbs brushed into a small tin bowl, plates stacked neatly to dry. The innkeeper wipes the boards with a damp cloth, pressing firmly enough to leave the wood clean but not stripped of its warmth. The cloth itself is wrung out and hung over a peg, its edges dripping faintly onto the stone floor. Each task folds into the next with seamless rhythm, no step demanding attention, all of them familiar and essential. On the counter, the kneaded dough has been shaped into a neat round and covered with a linen cloth. It will rest until morning, when the oven's heat will bring it to life. The cloth lifts slightly with each draught of air, as though the bread is already breathing in the stillness. The innkeeper checks it once, satisfied, and then leaves it undisturbed. In the corner, a second small pot of oats is set to soak for porridge, the grains swelling slowly in their bath of cool water. Tomorrow's breakfast is already taking shape in silence. The cat stretches from its stool, arching its back before curling once again, this time nearer the hearth. Its fur gleams in the firelight, catching a soft orange glow, and its paws twitch lightly as it resettles. The presence of the animal is steady, reminding the women that the kitchen is not theirs alone but shared with every living thing that finds comfort in its warmth. Once the last of the dishes are washed, the helper lays them out on a cloth near the hearth to dry. She places each one with care, arranging them by size, as though even in rest they deserve order. The innkeeper sets a small jar of salt back on its shelf, returns the herbs to their pegs, and tightens the corks of the oil bottles. Each sound is quiet but deliberate, the kind of noise that tells the body it is safe to let go, that the world is tended to. From time to time, the door to the dining room opens, and a faint wave of laughter or conversation drifts in. It is never loud, never harsh, only a soft reminder that others are near, that the house is alive. The door closes again, and the kitchen folds back into its rhythm, the balance between warmth and quiet perfectly held. The night grows later still, and yet the kitchen shows no sign of emptiness. Its shelves are full, its fire steady, its air rich with the day's labours. It is a place that promises continuity, that tomorrow will come and find everything as it should be, ready to begin again. The helper sets the last of the dishes aside and dries her hands on the hem of her apron. She moves to the shelves once more, running her fingertips along the row of jars, as if checking their weight without lifting them. The faint grit of flour dust clings to her skin, a reminder of the day's work that never truly leaves the air. She pauses at the row of dried herbs, straightening a small bundle of thyme that has leaned askew, the brittle stems crackling softly as she adjusts them. The scent released is sharp but fleeting, fading into the background hum of the kitchen's aromas. The innkeeper meanwhile draws a stool closer to the fire and settles herself for a moment of stillness. She leans forward with her elbows on her knees, watching the embers pulse with life. The flames have grown lower, their dance slower, yet the glow they give off is steady and generous. Her eyes rest on the pot of peas soaking quietly, the bread resting beneath its cloth, the oats swelling in their bowl. These small signs of tomorrow give her a quiet satisfaction, a reassurance that nothing has been forgotten. The kitchen will meet the morning prepared, just as it has for countless mornings before. On the table, the sliced bread that remains is wrapped carefully in a cloth. The crust is firm, but the innkeeper presses her hand lightly against it, feeling the give beneath her palm. She places the bundle into a wicker basket and sets it on the counter, ready for anyone who may come down before dawn in search of a bite. The gesture is quiet, unseen, but it carries the steady weight of habit, hospitality woven into the fabric of the inn. The kettle, now emptied of its hot water, rests at the edge of the hearth. A faint hiss escapes as its iron surface cools, the sound no louder than a sigh. Beside it, the teapot of chamomile waits, still warm, its golden liquid steeping in silence. The innkeeper pours herself a small cup, the steam curling up into her face, and she inhales deeply before taking a slow sip. The taste is delicate, a reminder of gardens and fields in bloom, a sharp contrast to the stone and wood around her. She cradles the cup in her hands, letting its warmth settle into her fingers. The helper sweeps the floor with a broom made of straw bristles, drawing slow arcs across the planks. The sound is soft but steady, a whisper against the wood that gathers the day's scattered flour and crumbs. She moves from corner to corner, the broom swaying like a pendulum, gathering each fragment into a small pile that is later swept into the hearth. The sparks accept it quietly, consuming what remains of the day in one last offering to the fire. The air in the kitchen feels heavier now, not with burden, but with comfort. The room holds the weight of a day that has been tended to fully, each task completed in its own time. The stone walls seem to lean inward protectively, the shelves resting in their stillness, the chairs empty but waiting. Even the silence between movements feels alive, like a fabric stretched gently across the room, holding everything in its place. The cat, shifting in its sleep, lets out a faint murmur and stretches one paw into the air, before curling tighter again. Its whiskers tremble in dream, and its ears twitch at sounds too small for human ears. The sight brings a faint smile to the innkeeper's face. For a moment she feels the kitchen as a whole, not merely a room, but a presence, a companion that has cradled countless nights before this one. The innkeeper rises from her stool and lifts a copper pan from its hook above the hearth. Its surface is dulled by use, darkened where the flames have kissed it, but she rubs at it with a cloth dipped in a mixture of salt and vinegar. The rag circles slowly, steady pressure releasing a faint metallic tang into the air. Each turn of her hand coaxes a patch of brightness back into view, and though the pan will never gleam like new, it takes on a quiet dignity in its softened shine. When she hangs it back on the hook, the firelight glances across its curve, flashing briefly before settling again into shadow. Across the room, the helper smooths out a stack of linens. She lays them flat on the table, folds them with practiced precision, and presses each crease firmly with the side of her hand. The fabric carries the faint smell of soap and sun, for it was dried on the line earlier in the day, and as she folds, she inhales that freshness as though it keeps her awake a little longer. She stacks the folded cloths neatly in a wooden chest, each layer resting like a calm breath upon the last. The innkeeper moves to the shelves where the spice jars sit. She checks their corks one by one, twisting each into place with a small turn of her wrist. A faint aroma lingers as she works. Nutmeg's warmth, cinnamon's sweetness, the sharper note of pepper. The scents are brief, like passing memories, yet they mingle with the heavier fragrance of stew and bread, weaving together into a harmony the kitchen knows by heart. The helper, broom still in hand, makes another slow pass across the floor. She pays special attention to the space beneath the table, coaxing out the flour dust that has settled there. Her motions are unhurried, as if each sweep is not a chore but a rhythm. The straw bristles whisper against the planks, and in the hush of the kitchen, the sound feels as calming as rain on a roof. When she's done, she sets the broom in its corner, leaning it against the wall with a quiet certainty that it will stand ready again come morning. Near the hearth, the innkeeper wipes the rim of the stew pot, dabbing away the ring left by its simmer. She draws the pot aside to cool fully, the iron legs scraping gently against the stone. The air above it shimmers faintly, a haze of warmth that rises toward the beams of the ceiling. She covers it with a wooden lid, fitting it snugly, then rests her hand on top for a moment as though sealing in the day's work. On a narrow shelf by the window, a row of candles flicker low in their holders. The helper trims the blackened wick of one with a small pair of shears, catching the ember in a clay dish before it can fall. The flame leaps higher, steadier, filling the corner with a richer glow. The other candles are left as they are, their flames leaning softly with the occasional draught that finds its way through the window's narrow crack. Shadows stretch and shift across the walls, tall and gentle, like companions moving in silence. The innkeeper pours herself a second small cup of chamomile tea, this time sharing a look with the helper. Without words, she pours another for the younger woman, placing the cup on the table with a nod. They drink in quiet, the steam curling between them, their eyes resting not on each other but on the fire. The warmth settles into their hands, their shoulders, the pace of their breathing. The tea does not hurry them to bed, but extends the calm, allowing the kitchen to linger in this state a little longer. The air itself feels thick with restfulness now, as though it has absorbed every sound and motion of the day, and holds them tenderly, unwilling to let them vanish. Every corner of the kitchen has been tended to, every object returned to its place, every sound softened into hush. And still, the room breathes on, content in its quiet labour, alive with the presence of those who care for it. The innkeeper turns her attention to the long wooden counter, its surface marked by years of cutting and kneading. She sprinkles a handful of coarse salt across it, and takes a damp cloth, rubbing in small circles. The salt grates faintly, scrubbing away the day's stains, leaving behind the clean oiled wood beneath. When she finishes, she sweeps the grains into her palm and scatters them into the hearth. The fire hisses as the crystals melt into the embers, sending up a brief spark before settling back into its glow. Beside her, the helper collects a basket of apples and pears that had been left on the sideboard. She inspects each one, turning them gently in her hands. The skins are smooth and cool, mottled with the soft imperfections of orchard fruit. She sets aside one or two with bruises, placing them in a smaller bowl for stewing the next day, and arranges the rest into a tidy pyramid. The simple act of order brings a faint smile to her face. The fruit now looks like a display rather than a jumble, ready to greet the morning light. The innkeeper checks the row of mugs hanging from their pegs. A few are still faintly damp from washing, and she wipes their rims with a clean cloth before leaving them to air dry. The clay feels cool under her fingers, each cup slightly different in shape and glaze, as though they carry the memory of the hands that formed them. She taps one lightly with her knuckle, and it responds with a hollow note, a quiet sound that lingers for a moment before fading back into the hush. In the corner, a stack of kindling is adjusted, the smaller twigs gathered neatly on one side, the thicker logs resting on the other. The helper kneels to straighten them, her hands brushing against the bark, flakes of wood catching on her apron. She adds a few dry pine cones to the basket, their resinous scent rising as they tumble together. Tomorrow, they will help coax the morning fire to life. For now, they wait in their ordered pile, silent and still, holding the promise of warmth. The cat stirs again, stretching with a long, luxurious ripple of its body before rolling onto its back. Its paws curl, its tail flicks once, and then it falls back into slumber, belly rising and falling in the steady rhythm of deep rest. The sight adds to the softness of the room, as though the animal's ease is woven into the fabric of the kitchen itself. The innkeeper takes a small iron candlestick from the mantel and sets it on the table. Its flame burns lower than the rest, steady and golden, casting a gentle circle of light around the folded linens. She dips her quill into a small inkwell and makes a few notes in a ledger, the scratching sound delicate against the silence. She writes down what was used today, what must be ordered from the village in the morning, what remains in the storeroom. Her handwriting is slow, careful, the loops of each letter drawn with patience. When she closes the book, the faint smell of ink lingers in the air, sharp and grounding. The helper, her work nearly finished, wipes her hands once more and smooths the folds of her apron. She stands at the window, looking out at the faint glow of lanterns in the distance. The glass is streaked with condensation, blurring the view, but she can see the outlines of roofs, the line of the road, and the thin trail of smoke from another chimney in the village. The sight reassures her. Others, too, are winding down, other hearths burning their last coals. She closes the shutter halfway, letting in only a sliver of cool night air. Back at the hearth, the innkeeper adds one last log to the fire, not to stoke it higher, but to let it burn down slowly into the night. The wood lands with a muffled thud, sparks spiralling briefly before settling into embers. The flames lean lazily to one side, curling and folding like ribbons. Their glow fills the room with a final layer of warmth, steady and unhurried, as though even the fire has entered into the pace of rest. The kitchen is not yet silent, but its movements have slowed to near stillness. Every sound, the scrape of wood, the crack of the fire, the faint rustle of fabric, feels softened, stretched, absorbed into the room's deep calm. Nothing urgent remains. The night belongs to the kitchen now, and the kitchen seems content to carry it gently forward. The helper takes up a small wooden tray and gathers the leftover scraps from the evening's preparation. Onion peels, carrot ends, and the thin skins of potatoes are collected into a neat pile, their earthy scent still faintly clinging to them. She places the tray near the back door, where they will be carried out to the compost heap at dawn. For now they rest in the cool air that seeps in whenever the door shifts on its hinges, the night breathing gently into the room. At the hearth, the innkeeper lowers the iron kettle into the ashes, letting it sit where the last of the coals will keep it faintly warm. The water inside will not boil again tonight, but it will remain ready for the morning's first tea. She adjusts the hook above the fire, the iron squeaking softly as it settles back into place. The sound is small, but it carries through the kitchen like the creak of an old companion stretching in the dark. The helper moves to the cellar door, lifting a lantern from its hook. She opens the door carefully, the hinges groaning, and descends a few steps to place the basket of apples and pears in the coolness below. The air rising from the cellar smells of stone and earth, damp and steady, as though it has not changed in centuries. She lingers a moment, listening to the faint drip of water somewhere deep within, before returning to the warmth above. When she closes the door, the kitchen seems even more secure, as though the world outside has been gently shut away. The innkeeper has begun polishing the wooden spoons, rubbing each handle with a rag dipped in a little oil. The wood, darkened with age, gleams faintly under her hand, the grain rising like ripples in water. She stacks them carefully in a crock, handles facing upward, ready to be taken again tomorrow. It is a simple ritual, but in the repetition lies a kind of reverence. The tools are cared for, honoured, even in their plainness. On the mantel above the hearth, a row of small earthen cups sits drying. The helper turns each one upside down, tapping them gently so that no drop of water lingers inside. Their hollow sound echoes softly in the room, low and resonant, before fading back into the steady crackle of the fire. She arranges them in a neat line, the clay edges touching, as though they too are resting shoulder to shoulder in the dim light. The innkeeper crosses to the corner where the flour sack rests. She unties the string at its neck and runs her hand through the soft powder, feeling its texture against her skin. The flour clings in a fine dust, white against her fingertips, and she nods with satisfaction before tying the sack closed again. She pats it gently, as one might a faithful animal, then leaves it settled against the wall. The cat has shifted once more, now curled into the crook of an unused chair leg. Its ears flick at the faintest sounds, the brushing of cloth, the settling of embers, but it does not stir fully. Its body is limp with trust, and in its stillness it reflects the quiet that has settled across the kitchen itself. The helper extinguishes one of the candles, pinching the wick with a small brass tool. A thin curl of smoke rises, winding its way toward the beams above, carrying with it the faint smell of wax. The remaining flames grow steadier in the reduced draught, their light mellowing as shadows pool in the corners of the room. The innkeeper leaves 2 candles burning. Their glow enough to hold the darkness at bay, but not enough to demand attention. The kitchen has slipped into half-light, a place between wakefulness and rest. Every task has been seen to, yet neither woman hurries toward the stairs. They linger, each absorbed in the quiet work of their hands, as though reluctant to let go of the room's gentle rhythm. The night stretches on, slow and deliberate, the kitchen alive only with the soft motions of tending, caring, and preparing for the day to come. The innkeeper moves to the hearth once more, her hands steady as she banks the fire. She shifts the glowing embers to the centre with the iron poker, arranging them into a compact bed of heat. A scoop of ash is sprinkled over the top, muffling the brightest flames but leaving a smouldering heart that will survive until morning. The crackling subsides to a softer hiss, the sound of fire settling into its sleep. The air still glows warm, but the urgency of flame has given way to the patience of coals. The helper covers the bowl of oats with a square of linen, fastening it with a length of twine so the grains may soak undisturbed through the night. She places the bowl near the edge of the counter, where the faint draught from the window will keep it cool. Her fingers brush against the dampness of the linen, and she presses it flat, ensuring no crease will let in dust. The simple act feels almost ceremonial, a quiet seal on tomorrow's meal. The innkeeper checks the larder, opening the wooden door to the small cool room beside the kitchen. Inside, shelves hold jars of pickled vegetables, crocks of butter, and small wheels of cheese resting on straw mats. She straightens a crock, tucks the cloth tighter around the butter and closes the door again, the latch clicking softly. The air that escapes smells faintly of vinegar and salt, mingling briefly with the warmth of the kitchen before disappearing. On the table, the helper unfolds one last cloth, smoothing its corners with care. She drapes it over the basket of sliced bread, covering what remains so it will not stale by morning. The cloth is thin, patched in places, but it is soft with long use, carrying the scent of countless washings and the faint memory of sun from earlier days. When she lays it down, it settles like a sigh, the basket now resting beneath its cover. The innkeeper takes a small brush and sweeps the soot from the hearth's edge. She gathers it into a pan, careful not to scatter the fine grey powder into the air, and empties it into a bucket kept by the back door. Tomorrow it will be carried out to the garden where ashes are sprinkled among the soil. For now it sits quietly in its container, another piece of the day set in its place. The helper gathers the knives, already washed, and wraps them in a length of cloth before tucking them into a drawer. The blades gleam faintly, catching the last of the candlelight before being hidden away. She closes the drawer gently, as though mindful not to disturb the stillness settling across the room. The innkeeper takes down the ledger once more and places it carefully in a small wooden box near the mantel. She rests her hand briefly on its cover, as if to mark the closing of the day's work before latching the box shut. The sound is soft but final, a punctuation mark that belongs not to endings, but to pauses. The helper glances once more at the window. The glass has grown cloudier with condensation, reflecting only the faint glow of candles from within. The world outside has disappeared into darkness, and the kitchen feels enclosed, complete, its circle of warmth untouched by the night. She pulls the shutter fully closed, leaving only the memory of stars behind. The cat shifts again, climbing from its chair to the hearth. It circles twice before curling directly onto the warm stones, purring faintly in its sleep. The sound is soft, almost hidden beneath the crackle of the coals, but it threads through the kitchen like the final note in a lullaby. One by one, the helper snuffs the candles not needed. She leaves only a single flame burning on the mantel, its glow reaching just far enough to hold the room in comfort. The shadows deepen, stretching wider across the floor and ceiling, until the kitchen lies wrapped in a hushed cocoon of light and dark. The innkeeper and her helper linger a moment longer, each standing in silence, their eyes resting on the familiar corners of the room. Nothing more is required tonight. The kitchen has been cared for and it breathes quietly, waiting for the dawn. The innkeeper lifts the heavy lid from the stew pot and stirs once more, though the broth has long since cooled to a gentle warmth. She skims the surface with the ladle, making sure no piece clings too close to the edge, then lowers the lid back into place. Over it she drapes a clean cloth, tucking in the corners with quiet precision. The scent of onions and herbs lingers faintly, but now it has softened into the air like an old memory, present but no longer strong. The helper retrieves a row of mugs from their pegs and sets them on the counter, lining them neatly side by side. She places a small jar of honey and a crock of dried tea leaves beside them, ready for the earliest riser who might stumble into the kitchen before dawn. Each object makes a muted sound as it meets the wood, steady and deliberate, as though each motion is part of a ritual older than words. At the hearth, the innkeeper arranges the fire irons, poker, tongs and shovel, setting them upright in their stand. Their metal glints briefly in the candlelight before fading back into shadow. She dusts her palms on her apron, leaving faint grey marks, then hangs the apron neatly from its peg. The gesture feels final, like the closing of a book at the end of a chapter. The helper moves to the back door once again, lifting the small tray of scraps. She opens the door just a crack and sets the tray outside, where the night air is cool and damp. For a moment, the sounds of the village breathe in, the distant bark of a dog, the soft whistle of wind across the lane, and then the door is shut once more, leaving the kitchen cocooned in its quiet. The shelves are given one last glance. Jars are aligned, cloths folded, bowls stacked with their rims perfectly even. The innkeeper straightens a small pot that had tilted on its side, pressing her hand to the shelf to steady it. The wood is cool beneath her palm, worn smooth by years of similar gestures. She withdraws her hand slowly, almost reluctantly, as though acknowledging the kitchen itself. The helper takes up a small brass snuffer and moves to the candles. She lowers the cone over each flame in turn, listening to the faint hiss as the light disappears. Wisps of smoke curl upward, delicate threads that weave briefly into the air before dissolving. She leaves only the single candle on the mantel burning, its flame steady and small, the sole guardian of the room through the night. The cat has nestled even closer to the hearth now, its body pressed against the warm stone. It breathes in slow, even waves, its purr subsided to silence. Its stillness mirrors the room, as though the animal and the kitchen have folded themselves into the same rhythm of rest. The innkeeper steps back, resting her hands lightly on the edge of the table. The helper joins her, standing nearby. For a few moments they do nothing but look around, at the embers glowing softly, the shelves lined neatly, the baskets and jars in their places. The kitchen has settled, every corner tended to, every task completed. The room exhales, and in that breath is the certainty that nothing more need be done. The innkeeper crosses to the wood bin and selects a few slender sticks of kindling. She lays them carefully in the hearth beside the glowing bed of coals, arranging them into a small pyramid. She does not light them, only places them where they will wait, ready to catch the first spark in the morning. The pale wood contrasts against the dark ash, a quiet promise of tomorrow's flame. The helper lifts the mugs she had set out earlier, rinsing them quickly in a basin of cool water. She dries them with a folded cloth and sets them again on the counter, this time upside down, their rims resting on the smooth surface. The faint clink as each cup touches down is delicate, more felt than heard, like the sound of pebbles settling in a stream. On a small hook by the door, a cloth bag holds the day's herbs. The innkeeper unties it and checks the contents, plucking out any stems that have grown brittle or faded. She sets these aside for the compost and tightens the drawstring once again. When she hangs the bag back in place, it swings gently, rocking with the faint draught from the shuttered window. The helper lifts a crock of butter from the sideboard and sets it into a cooler corner of the room, near the stone wall. She smooths the cloth cover over its top and presses the knot of twine tighter. The butter gleams faintly in the candlelight, its golden colour catching the last warmth of the flame before slipping back into shadow. The innkeeper picks up the ledger box once more, sliding it closer to the mantel. She presses the lid firmly shut, the wood giving a muted thud as it closes. For a moment she rests her hand on it, as if sealing the day within its pages. The sound, though small, carries through the kitchen with the weight of finality. The helper folds the broom bristles inward with a length of twine, binding them neatly so they will not fray before tomorrow's use. She leans it back into its corner, secure and tidy, as though even the tools themselves have been put to rest. The innkeeper opens the cupboard of crockery and checks the row of bowls stacked inside. She places a single cloth between the top two, a small buffer to keep them from knocking together. The cloth is old, its edges frayed, but it has served this purpose for years. She closes the cupboard softly, the latch clicking into place with a sound that feels like the settling of the room itself. The helper moves to the hearth one final time, lifting the iron poker to stir the embers gently. A faint red glow flares where the ashes part, then settles again, deeper and softer than before. She places the poker back into its stand, careful not to let it clatter, and wipes her hands on her apron with the satisfaction of a task completed. The candle on the mantel burns low, its wax pooling near the base. Its flame sways gently, a thin, steady tongue of light holding back the full darkness. The innkeeper glances at it, then at the room as a whole. Every corner is in order, every sound subdued, every motion stilled. She breathes in deeply, drawing in the faint blend of bread, herbs, smoke and soap, and exhales slowly as though sharing the room's rest. The kitchen now holds itself in a quiet so complete that even the smallest creaks of the building can be heard. The soft stretch of beams cooling, the faint patter of ash shifting in the hearth. It is not silence, but a fullness of sound so gentle that it soothes rather than stirs. The innkeeper picks up a knife that had been left drying on the board. Its blade gleams faintly in the candle's glow, catching a brief spark of light before she lowers it into her lap. She takes a cloth, rubs the edge slowly, and then oils the handle with a touch of care. The wood darkens slightly under her fingers, rich and smooth. When she lays the knife back into its drawer, the sound is barely more than a sigh, wood sliding against wood as it comes to rest. The helper approaches the back door and tests its latch. The iron handle is cool in her hand, the metal carrying the chill of the night. She presses it down once, listening to the hinges groan, then pulls the door snug against its frame and slides the bolt across. The heavy click of the iron bar falling into place resonates softly, final but not jarring, like a note struck low and held until it fades. She lingers a moment, her hand on the wood, before turning back into the warm hush of the room. The innkeeper reaches for the sack of salt, tying its neck tighter with twine. She lifts it slightly, feeling its weight, then sets it back against the wall with its folds smoothed flat. The fabric whispers faintly as it settles, the grains inside shifting like sand in a hidden shore. She adjusts the sack until it leans perfectly upright, as if even the smallest thing deserves its place in balance. The helper gathers a few sprigs of rosemary that had been left on the counter. She tucks them neatly into a small jar of water, placing it on the sill where tomorrow's light will find it. The herb releases a fresh burst of fragrance at her touch, green and pine-like, sharp against the softer scents of bread and ash. It lingers in the air as she sets the jar down, a final bright note before the room sinks deeper into quiet. The innkeeper glances at the table once more and smooths the cloth covering the bread. Her hand moves slowly, pressing out each wrinkle until the fabric lies flat as water. She tucks the edges beneath the basket, ensuring no draught can find its way inside. When she steps back, the loaf appears as though it is sleeping, hidden beneath its linen, waiting for the morning's knife. The helper takes the small dish that held scraps of butter and rinses it quickly at the basin. She dries it with the corner of her apron and places it on the shelf, upside down, so no dust will settle in it. The sound it makes as it touches the wood is hollow, low, and final. The cat lifts its head, ears twitching at the soft shift of a chair being moved closer to the wall. It blinks once, eyes glinting in the half-light, before curling back into its ball. Its tail flicks lazily, then stills. The room seems to follow its lead, every motion slowing into a deeper rest. The innkeeper finally approaches the mantel. She takes the brass snuffer in hand and lowers it toward the last candle. The flame bends, flickers, and disappears with a faint hiss, leaving behind a thin thread of smoke that spirals into the rafters. In the absence of light, the room is illuminated only by the faint pulsing glow of the embers. Shadows dissolve into one another, and the kitchen becomes a pool of warmth held in darkness. For a long moment, neither woman moves. They stand in the dim glow of coals, listening to the room's soft breaths, the creak of timbers, the whisper of cooling stone, the faint purr of the cat. The kitchen has been laid to rest, every task completed, every object cared for. The night has claimed it gently, leaving it whole and waiting. The embers shift with a faint crackle, a tiny sound that seems louder now in the absence of other noises. A soft plume of orange rises, then fades into red again, like the slow breath of the fire itself. From time to time a coal collapses inward, sending up a spray of sparks no larger than fireflies. They rise, hover for a heartbeat, and vanish into the dark. The hearth holds its glow steadily, not bright enough to chase shadows, yet strong enough to keep the room wrapped in warmth. The stone walls breathe faintly with the night. They hold the day's heat in their thickness, exhaling it back into the kitchen in quiet waves. The air smells of ash, of bread beneath its cloth, of herbs lingering faintly in jars along the wall. Each scent has softened, dulled by time, so that together they form a single fragrance, not strong enough to notice in full, but gentle enough to cradle memory. The wooden beams above creak every so slightly, their voices hushed. It is not the groan of strain, but the settling of wood against wood, like the sigh of an old house content in its stillness. A faint dust drifts from the rafters, caught for a moment in the glow of the fire before settling unseen onto the stone floor. The cat shifts in its sleep, rolling onto its side so its body presses more firmly against the warm stones. Its purr is gone now, replaced by the deeper rhythm of its breathing, steady and slow. One paw twitches in dream, claws flexing faintly, but the motion fades into stillness. Its body is limp with trust, as though the night itself has promised safety. The basket of bread, covered neatly, sits unmoving on the counter. The cloth rises barely perceptibly with each current of air from the shuttered window, then falls again. It seems almost alive, like a chest lifting in slumber. The jar of rosemary on the sill catches the faintest draught, its sprigs trembling just enough to release another thread of scent, sharp and green. The fragrance drifts a short way before sinking back into the heavier air. Even the tools of the room appear to rest. The iron shovel leans without tilt in its stand. The broom stands bound and neat, the crockery lined in rows like sentinels who have closed their eyes. The room seems to hum faintly, not with sound, but with the weight of all that has been done, a resonance of completed motion, of tasks fully tended. The ledger box on the mantel waits, its latch catching a dull gleam of emberlight. It is closed, yet its presence feels warm, as though the day's words still glow faintly within its pages. No one touches it, no one stirs it, but it holds part of the kitchen's breath nonetheless. The silence is not empty but layered, full of textures so soft they seem made for sleep. The faint pop of ash, the hush of air pressing against shutters, the warmth that ebbs and flows without movement. It is as though the kitchen itself has laid down to rest, breathing with the coals, dreaming with the cat, listening to its own stillness. Time passes here differently, not marked by clocks or steps, but by the lengthening pause between sounds. Each moment lingers longer, stretching like fabric held at its edges. The room does not rush toward morning. It simply holds itself in this limbo, endless and tender, until the world beyond decides to stir again. The embers in the hearth glow faintly, their light reduced now to a soft red pulse, as if the fire itself dreams. Every so often a coal crumbles into fine ash, sending up a muted sigh before fading completely. The warmth remains, low and steady, seeping into the stones around it, keeping the night at bay though its strength has waned. Beyond the shuttered window, the silence of the village begins to bend. Not with noise, not yet, but with a subtle thinning of the darkness. The black of night softens to a deeper grey. the faintest hint that morning waits just beyond the horizon. The shutter, though closed, cannot keep out the change entirely. A cooler current of air presses through the cracks, carrying with it the freshness of dew. The cat stirs first, as though it senses the shift before anyone else. Its ears twitch, its tail unfurls slowly, and it rolls to its side, eyes blinking half shut against the dim glow of the embers. For a moment it lifts its head, sniffing at the air that has grown lighter, fresher, then curls itself back down, unwilling to rise just yet. The basket of bread sits beneath its cloth, unchanged, but the linen has taken on a faint dampness at the edges from the cooling of the room. The rosemary sprigs on the sill are darker in the half-light, their tips catching the faintest whisper of grey that filters through the shutter's seams. The fragrance they release is sharper now, as though the new day has coaxed it awake. The innkeeper, resting in her chair by the hearth, shifts slightly. She has not gone fully to bed, but dozed there, her chin tipped forward, hands folded in her lap. The sound of her breath matches the rhythm of the fire's glow, slow and deep, the rest of one who has earned her quiet. She stirs when the wind nudges the shutter, though she does not open her eyes. The timbers of the inn release another sigh, softer than before. It is the sound of wood touched by the cool damp of morning, shrinking slightly, adjusting to the coming change. The house has its own rhythm, its own way of sensing the dawn, as though it too prepares to rouse without being asked. A faint chorus of birds stirs in the distance. It is not yet loud enough to fill the air, only the first notes, a single trill, a chirp, then silence again, as if they too are testing the edge of night. The sound drifts into the kitchen through the shuttered cracks, barely there, but enough to suggest that the long stillness of darkness is ending. Inside, the kitchen holds steady, reluctant to release its rest. The embers glow, the shelves stand in their perfect order, the air is warm with the last traces of the fire. Yet the light outside is shifting, and in that shift the kitchen feels poised, waiting, balanced on the quiet line between night and day. The first light of morning seeps through the cracks in the shutters, pale and silvery at first, then warming into a faint gold. It touches the edges of the window frame, outlines the grain of the wood, and stretches softly across the stone wall. The kitchen, so long held in ember glow, begins to shift in colour. Shadows lift, corners soften, and the room exhales as though it has been waiting for this moment all along. The innkeeper stirs from her chair, lifting her head slowly. Her eyes blink open, not startled, but steady, adjusting to the new brightness creeping in. She pushes back a strand of hair with the back of her hand and rises, stretching her arms with the stiffness of a night's rest taken in a sitting posture. The fire's embers have grown dim, but the air carries the fresh energy of morning cool against her skin. The helper enters quietly, her footsteps light on the worn boards. She carries with her the faint chill of the outdoors, the smell of dew, damp earth, and the sweet green scent of grass touched by the dawn. She sets down a small pail of milk on the counter, its surface frothy and white, collected from the inn's cow just moments before. The chill of it contrasts with the warming air, the first ingredient of the day waiting to be used. The shutters are unlatched, their wooden hinges groaning as they swing open. Light pours in fully now, flooding the kitchen with golden beams. It touches the rosemary sprigs on the sill, making them gleam vivid green, and brightens the jars along the shelves until their glass and clay shine as though newly polished. Dust motes rise, stirred by the air, and dance in the sun's rays like tiny flecks of gold suspended in water. The cat leaps from the hearth with sudden purpose, its paws pattering softly across the floor. It stretches long, back-arched, then moves to the patch of sunlight spilling onto the stones. There it settles again, purring faintly, its body bathed in warmth that grows by the minute. The innkeeper uncovers the basket of bread, the linen damp with dew at its edges. She slices the loaf, and steam curls up from its heart, carrying the yeasty scent into the brightened air. She sets the slices neatly on a plate, alongside a crock of butter brought up from the cool corner of the kitchen. The simple sight, bread, butter, morning light, feels like the first offering of the day. The helper sets a pan on the hearth, coaxing the embers with kindling until a thin flame rises. The faint crackle returns, a brighter echo of the night before, and the fire begins its new rhythm for the day. The kettle is placed on the iron hook once more, water inside trembling as the heat takes hold. Soon the quiet hum of boiling will join the chorus of morning sounds. Outside, the bird calls have grown more insistent, their voices layered into a steady song. The window admits not only light now, but the full sound of the waking village. A cart rolling along the lane, a dog barking twice, the distant creak of another shutter being opened. The kitchen is no longer alone in its silence. It has joined the world again. The innkeeper and helper move easily in their space, refreshed by the dawn. Cups are set out, butter spread, bowls readied for porridge. Every surface glows with light, every jar and crock seems brighter, as if the day itself has polished them clean. The kitchen has passed through its night of stillness, and stands now at the threshold of another day, alive, prepared, and welcoming. The first footsteps sound on the stairs, wooden boards creaking under slow, cautious weight. A guest emerges, still wrapped in the fog of sleep, their boots soft against the worn planks of the inn's hall. The dining room door opens with a faint groan, and a yawn drifts into the air, mingling with the smell of bread and wood smoke. More footsteps follow, some light, some heavy, each one adding to the low chorus of morning. The kitchen responds without hurry. The helper ladles oats from the pot into clay bowls, the steam rising in white ribbons that curl toward the rafters. She adds a drizzle of honey from a small jar, its amber thread catching the light as it falls. Each bowl is set carefully on a tray, accompanied by slices of fresh bread and pats of butter, the colours warm and inviting against the pale glaze of the crockery. The innkeeper carries the first tray through to the dining room. The space beyond is modest but welcoming. Wooden benches along the tables, a great hearth at the far end still glowing with embers from the night. Windows have been unshuttered, and light pours in, golden and fresh, illuminating the faces of those just risen. Guests settle slowly, rubbing sleep from their eyes, adjusting cloaks and shawls, murmuring their first greetings of the day. The dining room fills with the low hum of voices. There is no clamour, only the gentle rise and fall of conversation. A farmer speaking of the weather, a traveller mentioning the road ahead, a child laughing softly as she breaks her bread. The sounds weave together like threads in cloth, forming a background murmur that feels both alive and comforting. Back in the kitchen, the helper refills the kettle, lifting it with both hands to pour water into cups lined with tea leaves. The fragrance of chamomile, mint and black tea rises, each cup giving off its own small breath of steam. She arranges them on a second tray, steadying it with both hands before carrying it through the doorway. The tea joins the morning chatter, the clink of spoons against cups adding a brighter note to the room's melody. The innkeeper returns to the kitchen and begins slicing more bread, the crust crackling under the knife. She places the slices into a basket, covering them lightly with a cloth to keep them warm. The helper has already begun preparing eggs from the morning's pail, cracking each shell against the rim of a bowl. The yolks fall with a golden plop, mixing with the whites in a sheen of pale yellow. Soon the pan hisses as the eggs meet the hot iron, filling the air with the soft scent of morning cooking. The rhythm of the kitchen is different now, not the stillness of the night, but not rushed either. Each task follows the next naturally, as though guided by the day itself. The fire crackles brighter, the clatter of dishes rises and falls, and the voices in the dining room blend seamlessly with the motions of the kitchen. It is bustle, but it is steady bustle, a hum that reassures rather than overwhelms. The cat has taken its new post on the windowsill, tail curled neatly, watching the comings and goings with half-lidded eyes. From time to time it blinks slowly, acknowledging the change of pace without moving to join it. Even in the busyness, the kitchen holds its calm. The innkeeper leans over the hearth, turning the eggs with a wooden spatula. The pan hisses softly as the edges curl and firm, the aroma rich but delicate, carried upward into the beams above. She slides the cooked eggs onto a plate, lays a sprig of parsley across the top, and sets it on the tray beside bread and porridge. The motions are smooth, unhurried, as though she has performed them countless times before. The helper checks the honey jar, noting how the morning light glints through the thick amber within. She tilts it carefully, coaxing a slow ribbon onto another bowl of oats. The honey lands with a faint shimmer, sinking into the porridge like sunlight into still water. She wipes the rim of the jar with the corner of her apron before placing it back on the shelf, the glass sticky but warm beneath her fingers. The shelves are visited often now. The helper reaches for a small crock of jam, dark plum, rich and tart, and sets it out on the counter. She fetches another of apple preserves, their golden pieces suspended in syrup catching the glow of the window. Each jar is placed neatly, opened with the careful twist of a knife blade against the wax seal. The smells mingle: sweet fruit, tang of vinegar, faint earthiness of clay pots warming in the light. The innkeeper lifts the kettle again, now steaming with a brighter urgency. She pours hot water into a set of mugs lined with mint leaves, the fragrance rising at once, filling the kitchen with a cool, sharp note that cuts through the heavier scents. The steam fogs her face briefly, dampening her cheeks before vanishing. She places the mugs together, their rims clinking softly as they touch. The helper fetches a basket of apples from the cellar steps, polishing each with the hem of her sleeve before slicing them into wedges. The knife moves rhythmically, slice, turn, slice, the fruit crisp under its edge. The pieces are arranged on a wooden plate, skins gleaming red and yellow, their pale flesh bright in contrast. She places the plate on the counter where the next tray waits, the kitchen's offering growing steadily. The cat remains on its sill, tail twitching in occasional approval. Its eyes track the helper's movements, then close again, content to bask in the patch of sunlight now spilling further across the floor. The warmth deepens, mingling with the heat of the fire, until the kitchen feels like a vessel brimming with comfort. The innkeeper wipes her hands on a cloth, folds it neatly, and tucks it back on its peg. She turns to the helper, their movements crossing without a word, each knowing what comes next. A plate is lifted, a tray balanced, a cup placed precisely where it belongs. Their motions weave together seamlessly, a practiced duet of morning labour. The sounds of the kitchen form their own music now, the crackle of fire, the hiss of pan, the quiet thud of a knife on board, the gentle clink of crockery. None of it is harsh, none of it loud. It is the hum of work done well, of a day beginning not with rush, but with balance. The innkeeper cracks more eggs into the pan, the yolks breaking with a golden splash against the iron. She stirs them slowly, letting them gather into folds, the steam rising in gentle puffs. The smell deepens, mingling with the faint sweetness of jam and the sharper scent of mint from the mugs cooling on the counter. Each plate she fills is placed on a tray with a quiet decisiveness, ready to join the growing line of dishes awaiting the dining room. The helper opens a jar of coarse oat biscuits baked the day before. She arranges them in a shallow basket, laying a clean cloth at the bottom and tucking the edges up around the sides. The biscuits are pale brown, flecked with darker grains, their texture rough but satisfying to the touch. She taps one lightly with her finger and smiles at the firm sound it makes, then sets the basket beside the butter crock. On the shelves, a crock of cheese is brought forward. The helper slices it into wedges, the blade leaving clean lines through its pale surface. The cheese is mild and soft, its aroma gentle but distinct, a perfect companion for the fresh bread. She places the slices onto a wooden platter, spacing them evenly as if arranging them for display. The sight of the bread, butter, jam, and cheese together forms a quiet abundance, modest but complete. The innkeeper checks the fire again, adding a single stick of kindling to brighten the coals. The flame leaps briefly, then steadies, casting new light across the pans. She stirs the porridge pot once more, ensuring the oats remain smooth, their surface rippling like water under her spoon. She ladles out another bowl, topping it with a scattering of apple slices, the fruit's crisp freshness balancing the porridge's warmth. The helper fetches a crock of milk from the cool corner, dipping a ladle into its creamy surface. She pours it into a small pitcher, its stream pale and steady, before placing the pitcher beside the bowls of oats. Droplets cling to its spout, catching the light as they fall, darkening the wood beneath in tiny circles. The cat leaps down from its perch on the sill, winding between the women's legs as though reminding them of its presence. The innkeeper nudges it gently aside with her foot, her expression indulgent. The cat settles near the hearth once more, content to resume its post where warmth and activity converge. The helper opens another jar of preserves, this one filled with dark berries, their syrup thick and glossy. She spoons a small portion into a dish, the colour rich and jewel-like in the morning light. She places it beside the honey and jam, a trio of sweetness for the day's first guests. The sounds of the kitchen continue their soft layering. The scrape of spoon against pot, the tap of knife against board, the hollow thud of mugs placed on wood. Each sound joins the whole without clamour, a harmony of labour that fills the room as naturally as the sunlight. The air is alive, not rushed, not loud, but steady, as though the kitchen itself has woken fully now, carrying the inn into its day with calm assurance. The dining room door swings open and closed in a quiet cycle, each time admitting the muted hum of conversation and the shuffle of boots against floorboards. The helper carries out a tray and returns with another, the wooden surface now scattered with empty mugs and crumbs from bread. She balances it easily, setting it near the basin where water already waits, the cups clinking together in a soft chorus. The innkeeper stirs the pan again, this time with a brisker motion, folding eggs into neat layers before sliding them onto a plate. The fire beneath has grown brighter with the morning kindling, its crackle more insistent, though never harsh. Heat radiates through the kitchen, mingling with the golden light streaming from the window. The scent of butter, eggs, and toast drifts outward with each swing of the dining room door, meeting the hum of guests like an invisible greeting. The helper wipes the counter quickly, brushing flour dust and breadcrumbs into her palm, then turning to refill the basket of bread. More slices are cut, the knife crunching through the crust, releasing warm steam into the cool air. She adds a few biscuits on top, nestling them into the cloth so the basket looks once more abundant. Every tray that leaves the kitchen must carry not just food, but a sense of plenty. The kettle hums at a steady pitch, close to boiling, and the innkeeper pours its contents into mugs already lined with tea leaves. Steam billows, curling upward like ribbons of white silk. The sharp green of mint mingles with the earthy aroma of black tea, filling the air with freshness. She sets the mugs neatly together, the rims shining with heat, and slides them onto a tray bound for the waiting guests. The helper now tends to the crock of cheese, slicing more wedges with efficient care. The knife glides easily through the pale surface, each piece falling cleanly into place. She arranges them with bread and jam, creating another small spread to balance the trays. The sound of her knife tapping the board punctuates the room's rhythm, a bright counterpoint to the lower hum of fire and voices. The innkeeper takes a tray herself, steady in her step as she carries it to the dining room. For a moment the chatter beyond grows clearer, laughter low and warm, a child's voice asking for more bread, the murmur of travellers comparing roads. Then the door closes again, and the kitchen returns to its self-contained harmony. The helper gathers used spoons from a tray and dips them into the basin of hot water. She wipes each carefully with the cloth, setting them to dry in a neat line. The water ripples faintly with each dip, sending tiny waves that lap gently against the basin's rim. The clink of metal against ceramic is soft, deliberate, the sound of labour done without haste. The cat, energised by the bustle, weaves between the women's legs once more, tail curling high. It pauses by the door, ears pricking at the sounds beyond, but returns quickly to its spot by the fire, where the warmth is constant and the scents are richest. Its presence is a thread in the morning tapestry, unnoticed, yet always felt. Now the kitchen has reached its full rhythm. Fire glowing, knives working, mugs steaming, trays circling in and out. The air is filled with the overlapping fragrances of bread, tea, honey, butter, and eggs, each distinct but blending into one whole. The light is strong now, no longer the tentative grey of dawn, but the steady gold of morning. Every surface shines, every sound joins the whole, and the inn's heart beats with quiet purpose. The hearth crackles brightly, the flames licking around the iron pan as the innkeeper stirs another batch of eggs. The sound is a low hiss, broken by the scrape of the wooden spatula against the pan's edge. She slides the finished portion onto a plate, and at once the helper places bread beside it, the crust still warm, butter melting into its ridges. Together they arrange the dish onto a tray, the coordination wordless but flawless, as if rehearsed over many mornings. On the counter, the honey jar catches the sunlight, its golden contents glowing like liquid fire. The helper dips a spoon carefully, twisting it so the thick thread falls neatly into a bowl of oats. The honey drizzles in a slow spiral, sinking into the porridge, leaving a glossy sheen on its surface. Beside it, the jar of preserves sits open, dark berries glistening in their syrup. a contrast of deep colour against the pale stone counter. The kettle begins to whistle, its voice cutting through the layered sounds. The innkeeper lifts it swiftly, pouring the steaming water into waiting mugs. The rising mist curls and swirls, fogging the air with warmth. Mint leaves float to the surface, releasing their cool sharpness, while darker teas send out an earthy note. The steam fogs her hands and face for a heartbeat before it vanishes into the kitchen's warmth. The helper slices apples, the knife tapping briskly against the board. Each wedge falls neatly into a shallow dish, skins shining red, green, and yellow, their scent crisp and sweet. She adds a small sprig of rosemary to the plate, more for beauty than flavour, a touch of green that brightens the simple arrangement. The dish joins the line of food waiting to be carried out, another small piece of plenty to meet the day's guests. Trays move in and out of the kitchen, steady as a tide. They return with empty mugs, crumbs of bread, and bowls scraped nearly clean. Each is set on the counter, where the innkeeper or helper collects them for washing. At the basin, spoons clink as they're dipped into warm water, wiped clean with soft cloths, and laid to dry in a straight line. The water ripples quietly, catching the light, as if even the basin itself is awake and working. The cat, stirred by the rhythm, threads between their legs again, brushing its fur against their ankles. Its tail rises high, curling at the tip, before it slips under the counter, only to reappear near the hearth. It pauses there, blinking slowly in the glow of the fire as though the bustle is its own form of entertainment. The innkeeper fetches more butter from the crock, its golden surface cool and solid. She spreads it onto bread with firm strokes, the knife leaving smooth lines as the butter softens against the warm slices. Each piece gleams faintly in the sunlight, simple but irresistible, ready to be added to another tray. The helper folds another cloth, laying it gently over a fresh basket of biscuits. She adjusts the edges so they fall neatly, smoothing the wrinkles with the palm of her hand. The cloth is pale linen, its weave visible in the morning light, softening the look of the basket while keeping its contents warm. The kitchen hums in full voice now. Fire crackles, water hisses, knives tap, spoons clink, trays creak under weight. And beneath it all, the low murmur of voices drifts in from the dining room, weaving with the kitchen's rhythm into one seamless song. It is busy, yes, but it is not chaos. It is a harmony of practiced movements, a dance of hands and tools and flame, every part falling into place. The flow of footsteps through the dining room door slows. Trays that once left heavy with steaming bowls and baskets now return half-filled, carrying only a few empty mugs, a scattering of crumbs, and the faint sheen of butter clinging to plates. The helper gathers them, her movements as steady as before, though her pace has softened, no longer pressed by urgency. She sets each tray near the basin, where warm water waits, rippling faintly as if eager for its final work. The innkeeper stands at the hearth, stirring the porridge one last time. Only a small portion remains, clinging to the sides of the pot. She scrapes it carefully into a bowl, sets it on the counter, and covers it with a cloth. There will be no need to prepare more until tomorrow. The fire beneath the pot crackles lower now, its heat gentler, no longer pushed to its fullest. The flame leans lazily, releasing a thin ribbon of smoke that winds up the chimney. The helper begins stacking clean spoons into their crock, the faint clink of metal against clay sharper now in the quieter air. She dries each mug with a linen cloth, placing them upside down in a neat row. Their rims shine faintly in the sunbeam that stretches across the counter. The sound of her work is lighter, less layered, and it lingers longer in the stillness returning to the room. The innkeeper slices the last of the bread, arranging the pieces in a small basket. She places a crock of jam beside it, tucks a cloth over the top, and sets it on the edge of the counter. It is not meant for the rush of guests now, but for anyone who may wander in later, hungry after the bustle has passed. Her hands rest on the basket for a moment before she steps back, satisfied. From the dining room, voices fade into a softer murmur. Guests finish their meals, their conversation turning to plans for the road ahead or tasks for the day. The laughter is quieter, the clatter of cutlery almost gone. The sound that drifts back into the kitchen is no longer a chorus but a gentle hum, a thread that does not demand attention. The helper wipes the counter with a damp cloth, pressing her palm against the smooth wood as she passes over it. She gathers the last crumbs into her hand and scatters them into the hearth, where they flare briefly before vanishing. She hangs the cloth neatly over a peg, its edges dripping faintly into a bucket placed below. The cat, sensing the change, stretches and yawns, its pink tongue curling before it settles back on the sill. Its tail sways once, then lies still. The sunlight grows warmer on its fur and its eyes drift closed again. It has no part in the work, yet it mirrors the kitchen's rhythm perfectly. Active when the bustle was strongest, restful now as the room softens. The kettle whistles one final time, its steam releasing with a hiss. The innkeeper lifts it from the hook and pours the last of its water into a single mug lined with mint. She sets the kettle aside to cool, its handle clicking against the iron hook. The mug is placed on the table, not for a guest this time, but for herself. She sits at the edge of a stool, cradling it in both hands, breathing in its fragrance. Her shoulders lower, her pace slowing, the kitchen reflecting her quieting heart. The peak has passed, and the room begins to breathe again. No longer urgent, no longer pressed, but steady and calm, carrying the satisfaction of work completed and the promise of rest. The helper gathers the trays, stacking them neatly against the wall. Their wooden frames creak softly as they settle into place, the sound hollow and final after the clatter of the morning rush. She checks each one for crumbs, brushing the last of them into her palm and scattering them into the hearth. The stack leans slightly, worn from years of use, yet it stands dependable, waiting for tomorrow. The innkeeper tends the hearth, nudging the coals with the iron poker. The flames respond weakly, their energy spent on the long stretch of cooking. She draws a few of the embers to the side, leaving the fire to settle back into a glow. The pan is lifted off the heat and set aside, its bottom hissing faintly as it meets cooler stone. She wipes the spatula clean and rests it across the rim of the pan, the gesture marking the pause between work and rest. At the basin, the helper washes the last of the mugs. The water has cooled, its surface dappled with ripples of light from the open shutters. She scrubs slowly, her motions unhurried now, each dip of the cloth releasing a faint splash. The mugs, dried and stacked, join their companions on the shelf, their rims gleaming in the golden morning light. The sound of their placement is soft, almost musical, like a quiet punctuation closing the sentence of the morning. The innkeeper wipes the counter one final time, her cloth moving in smooth, practiced arcs. She presses down firmly to lift any lingering flour, then runs her hand across the grain of the wood to feel its clean surface. The counter shines faintly in the sunlight, the scars of knives and bowls softened into patterns of history rather than marks of labour. From the dining room, chairs scrape back as guests rise. The murmur of voices drifts toward the door, accompanied by the muted thump of boots on the wooden floor. The helper pauses at the sound, listening as the rhythm changes, no longer the settled tones of eating, but the shifting of bodies preparing to leave. The voices grow fainter, moving toward the inn's front door, until only a low echo remains. The cat stretches luxuriously, front paws outstretched, tail arching high. It leaps lightly down from the sill and pads across the floor, brushing past the helper's ankles before curling itself once more near the hearth. The fire there is gentler now, embers more than flame, but the stones are still warm enough to cradle its body. Its purr rises faintly, a soft vibration blending into the hush of the room. The innkeeper takes a sip from her mug, the mint tea cooled now but still fragrant. She rests the mug on the table, fingers lingering on its rim, eyes wandering over the room. She sees the stacked trays, the orderly shelves, the folded cloths, the covered bread basket. Each detail reassures her. The morning has been tended to, the guests served, the kitchen set right once more. The helper folds her apron neatly, hanging it back on its peg. The fabric bears faint stains of flour and butter, reminders of the morning's work, yet it hangs clean enough to wait for the next meal. She smooths its folds with her hand, a final gesture of order before stepping back. The sunlight streams fuller now through the open shutters, illuminating the motes of flour dust still drifting in the air. They shimmer briefly before settling onto the stone floor, vanishing into the quiet. The kitchen is no longer bustling, but neither is it empty. It holds a fullness, a calm after labour, a steady hum that belongs to spaces where everything has been cared for. The fire sinks lower. The last tray is placed on the shelf. The voices in the dining room fade into silence, and the kitchen, its work complete, breathes gently into the heart of the day. The kitchen has grown still again, the clamour of breakfast fading into memory. The innkeeper and helper move more slowly now, not with the pace of work, but with the quiet motions of habit. The fire rests low, its flames reduced to a few tongues that lick lazily at the coals. The warmth remains steady, enough to keep the chill away, but it no longer presses outward with urgency. On the counter, the basket of bread sits covered, untouched since the last tray was carried out. The linen drapes softly over it, edges smoothed flat, its weight suggesting patience. It will be ready when needed, and until then, it waits in silence. The jars of jam and honey have been sealed and returned to their places on the shelf, their bright colours dimmed now in the softer light of mid-morning. The helper pours the basin of cloudy water into a bucket, her hands careful as she tips it so it splashes without noise. She carries the bucket to the back step, empties it onto the earth beyond the door, and returns with it clean and empty. When she sets it back beside the basin, its hollow thud echoes briefly before being absorbed by the hush. The innkeeper takes a moment to sweep the floor again, not out of necessity but ritual. The bristles of the broom whisper across the planks, coaxing up the fine dust that has settled in the corners. She gathers it into a small pile and brushes it into the hearth, where it disappears into the soft grey ash. Her movements are unhurried, almost meditative, as though the act of sweeping soothes her as much as it cleans. The sunlight has shifted, now streaming more directly across the room. It paints a long slanted rectangle across the table, illuminating the scratches and grooves left by years of cutting and kneading. The helper pauses to rest her hands against it, feeling the warmth of the sun through the wood. For a moment she leans into the stillness, listening to the faint hum of bees outside the window, their sound drifting in like a thread of summer. The cat has chosen its place for the morning, curled in a coil on the sill, paws tucked beneath its body. Its tail flicks once, then lies still. The patch of sunlight has shifted just enough to warm its fur, and it seems content to remain unmoving for hours. The faint rise and fall of its sides matches the slow rhythm of the house itself. The innkeeper sits at the table, ledger open before her. She dips her quill and begins to note the morning's supplies. Bread loaves counted, eggs remaining, the level of flour in the sack. Her writing is unhurried, each word drawn with care, the scratch of the pen audible in the quiet. The helper folds cloths beside her, stacking them neatly, the soft rustle of linen keeping her company. Together, their motions form a quiet duet, gentle and unintrusive, filling the space without breaking its calm. The village outside stirs faintly now, the distant call of a peddler, the hollow knock of a cartwheel over a stone. These sounds slip in through the shutters, reminders that the world is awake, though here in the kitchen time moves differently. It is not rushed, not heavy, but slow, steady, and sure. The inn has shifted from its bustle into its lull. No trays need filling, no voices call from the dining room, no flames roar in the hearth. The kitchen simply holds its quiet order, its mid-morning rest, waiting patiently for whatever the day might ask of it next. The light has shifted higher, filling the kitchen with a clearer brightness. The long angled beams of dawn have lifted, replaced by a steadier glow that spreads evenly across the stone floor and wooden counters. The warmth of the sun now blends with the lingering heat of the hearth, giving the room a gentle fullness, as if the air itself has settled into comfort. The innkeeper closes her ledger with a soft thud, resting her hand on its cover for a moment before setting it aside. Her notes for the morning are complete. Flour measured, butter tallied, eggs counted, herbs marked for use. The neat columns of writing sit undisturbed in the book, ready to be consulted when the day turns toward its next task. She places the ledger back in its box on the mantel, the latch clicking faintly as it closes. The helper has begun gathering the small things that will not wait until later. A bundle of onions is unbraided, their papery skins rustling as she lays them on the table. Carrots are fetched from the cellar, their roots still dusted with earth, their green tops curling faintly. She rinses them in a basin of cool water, the dirt slipping away in soft clouds, leaving the vegetables bright and clean. The sound of the water trickling into the basin is steady, like a muted stream running through the quiet. The hearth, though banked after breakfast, is stirred once more. A small log is placed on the glowing embers, coaxing out a livelier flame. It catches slowly, then crackles with renewed life, sending the faint aroma of smoke and resin into the air. The pan is set nearby, not yet filled but ready, a quiet signal that the day's next work is approaching. The innkeeper checks the bread once more, lifting the cloth from the basket. Only a few slices remain, and she makes a note with a small nod that another loaf will be baked before evening. For now, the remaining bread is enough, laid neatly beside the butter crock for any guest who lingers past breakfast. She tucks the cloth back into place, smoothing it carefully as though tucking a child into rest. From outside, the village grows louder, the clip of hooves on the lane, the call of a woman selling fresh herbs, the clang of a blacksmith striking metal in measured blows. These sounds drift faintly into the kitchen, soft but insistent, the world beyond pressing a little more firmly at the inn's quiet walls. The kitchen does not resist, it simply absorbs them, folding them into its steady rhythm. The helper lifts a small sack of flour onto the counter, unties it, and scoops a portion into a bowl. She sifts it slowly, the fine dust falling in a pale cascade, catching the light like drifting snow. She hums softly under her breath, not a tune so much as a thread of sound, something to carry the silence forward. The flour gathers in a mound, waiting to be kneaded into dough when the time is right. The cat stirs from its patch of sunlight, stretching long and slow before hopping down from the sill. It pads across the floor, tail high, and curls briefly around the innkeeper's legs before settling once more near the hearth. Its movements are unhurried, mirroring the pace of the room itself. The kitchen is no longer in the hush of mid-morning, but neither has it reached the rush of midday. It rests in between, quiet tasks unfolding, small preparations beginning, the air filled with the promise of the next meal. Noon is approaching, and the room seems ready to rise gently into it, steady as ever, without hurry. The helper gathers the carrots she rinsed earlier and sets them on the table. With her knife she slices them into rounds, each cut landing with a soft thud against the board. The orange pieces scatter into a shallow bowl, their colour vivid against the pale wood. The rhythm of her cutting is steady but unhurried, each motion precise, the sound blending with the faint crackle of the fire. The innkeeper peels onions beside her, their papery skins whispering as they fall into a small pile. She chops them slowly, the sharp scent rising into the air and prickling her eyes faintly. She wipes her cheek with the back of her hand, then slides the chopped pieces into a clay dish, ready to be added to the pot. The smell is strong but familiar, a foundation for many meals, and it fills the kitchen with a sharp brightness that cuts through the heavier scents of ash and bread. At the hearth, the pot is filled again with water, ladled carefully from the bucket. The innkeeper sprinkles in a handful of salt, listening to the faint hiss as the grains vanish into the warmth. She stirs with a wooden spoon, the water swirling in lazy circles, steam beginning to rise in thin threads. It is the first stir of what will become the midday stew, the start of the meal that will anchor the day. The helper adds garlic to her board, crushing each clove beneath the flat of her knife before chopping it finely. The smell releases at once, pungent and earthy, threading its way through the air. She tips the pieces into the waiting dish with the onions, the two scents mingling into something richer, something already promising of comfort. A bunch of herbs is fetched from the pegs on the wall, thyme, parsley, and a sprig of bay. The innkeeper lays them gently on the counter, running her fingers along their stems to release their oils. She binds them together with twine, forming a small bundle that she sets beside the pot. When it meets the water, its green fragrance will rise into the air, filling the room with a softer, rounder scent than onions alone can give. The fire has grown stronger again, flames dancing higher, and the pot begins to murmur as it warms. The sound is low, a bubbling that speaks of the hours ahead when the stew will thicken and deepen in flavour. The innkeeper lowers the carrots into it, then the onions and garlic, each addition sending up a plume of steam as the water accepts them. She stirs again, the wooden spoon tapping gently against the rim. The helper moves to the cellar once more, returning with a cut of meat wrapped in paper. She places it on the counter, unwrapping it slowly, the paper rustling as it unfolds. The meat is sliced into cubes, the knife sliding through with a firm, even pressure. The pieces are dropped into the pot where they sink beneath the surface, sending up another wave of steam scented with salt and onion. Bread dough prepared earlier has risen beneath its cloth, and now the helper lifts it gently. She presses her fingers into it, the surface springing back against her touch. She divides it into loaves, shaping them with practiced motions, and sets them near the hearth, where the warmth will help them rise further. The flour clings to her hands, dusting her apron, leaving pale streaks that mark her work. The kitchen hums again, not with the bustle of breakfast, but with a quieter, steadier rhythm. Chopping, stirring, arranging, kneading, each motion following the last, building a harmony of sound and scent. The air is filled with promise, of stew that will thicken, bread that will rise, herbs that will soften into the warmth. Noon approaches, and the kitchen is readying itself, not rushed, but steadily, surely, with every gesture anchored in care. The stew has found its voice, bubbling steadily in the great pot over the hearth. Each burst of air rises to the surface with a soft plop, sending up waves of steam that cloud the air with fragrance. Carrots glow orange in the broth, onions have melted to silk, and the herbs tied with twine release their green perfume, transforming the water into something rich and full. From time to time, the innkeeper leans over, stirring with her long spoon, the sound of wood against iron echoing faintly in the room. On the table, the helper shapes the loaves into their final rounds. She slides them into the oven built into the side of the hearth, where the heat radiates strong and steady. As the door closes with a thud, the smell of yeast and flour thickens in the air. Already the faintest hint of crust begins to form, carried on the draught that seeps through the cracks of the oven door. The chopping board is busy again. Potatoes this time, cut into firm cubes that fall with a dull rhythm into the waiting bowl. Each piece is pale and starchy, their scent earthy, grounding the brighter notes of garlic and herbs. The helper tips them into the pot, and the stew welcomes them with a deeper bubbling, the broth swelling higher, the surface dotted now with oil and spice. The innkeeper prepares a platter of cheese and apples, arranging slices into a fan that catches the light. Beside it, she places a dish of plum preserves, their syrup glossy and jewel-dark. She smooths the surface with the back of the spoon, leaving it glistening like polished stone. She sets the platter near the edge of the counter, ready to be carried through once the guests begin asking for more than stew alone. The fire is at its fullest now, flames darting high, wrapping the iron hooks in gold. The hearth itself hums with heat, casting a glow across the stone floor. Shadows flicker across the walls, moving in time with the flames as though the kitchen itself breathes with the fire's rhythm. The air is warm but not oppressive, a heat that promises food, comfort and fullness. The helper lifts the lid of the oven for a moment to check the bread. The loaves have risen tall, their crust turning golden. The scent is overwhelming now, a wave of wheat and warmth that rolls across the room. She closes the door quickly to keep the heat inside, but the fragrance lingers, curling into every corner of the kitchen. The innkeeper ladles out a small taste of the stew into a wooden cup. She blows gently across its surface, then sips, her eyes closing for a moment. She nods, satisfied, then adds a pinch of salt and stirs again. The motion sends another ripple through the pot, the vegetables and meat rolling lazily in the rich broth. The cat prowls across the floor now, restless with the abundance of scent. It pauses near the hearth, tail twitching, eyes half-lidded as it gazes at the flames. It does not beg, but its presence is felt, another figure in the living rhythm of the kitchen. The sounds of preparation layer together, the bubbling pot, the scrape of a knife, the hollow thud of a loaf being shifted, the faint hiss of fat meeting iron. The air is thick with aromas, bread darkening in the oven, herbs mingling with meat, fruit preserves sweetening the air. Everything is alive, yet nothing is hurried. The noon meal grows steadily, richly, out of the same calm certainty that has carried the kitchen from dawn. The stew bubbles more deeply now, the broth thickened into a velvety richness. Each bubble rises with a slow, deliberate weight, breaking the surface in a quiet plop before dissolving back into the swirl. Bits of carrot and potato roll lazily in the pot, while the cubes of meat have darkened and softened, releasing their juices into the golden broth. The bundle of herbs drifts gently at the top, tied stems bobbing like a buoy, perfuming every corner of the room with their green sharp fragrance. The bread loaves, hidden behind the oven's iron door, have begun to press outward with their own energy. The crusts crack softly as they expand, faint snapping sounds that whisper even beneath the steady roar of the fire. The air is filled with the mingled scent of wheat, yeast, and warmth, layered over the heavier richness of stew. Each breath in the kitchen tastes like nourishment, earthy and full. The helper moves to prepare root vegetables for roasting. She scrapes parsnips clean, the knife dragging along their rough skins with a muted rasp. Carrots are halved lengthwise, their bright centres gleaming in the light. She lays them in a shallow tray, drizzles oil from a small jug, and scatters pinches of coarse salt across their surfaces. When she sets the tray near the fire, the oil begins to glisten, ready for the heat to transform it into a sheen of gold. The innkeeper grates a small wheel of cheese, the shavings falling into a clay bowl in light curls. The motion is steady, the rasp of metal against rind adding another sound to the symphony of cooking. She pauses, lifts a curl to her lips, tastes, and nods. The cheese is sharp, pungent, and will lend brightness to the meal. She sprinkles a few curls into a dish of chopped greens, tossing them together with her hands, the leaves rustling like parchment in the quiet. At the hearth, the fire is steady and bright, flames coiling around the iron hooks. Its crackle has become part of the room's heartbeat, answering the bubbling of the stew and the faint snap of the bread. Sparks jump occasionally, landing harmlessly on the stone, glowing briefly before fading into ash. The innkeeper tends it with the poker, shifting coals into place, her movements as precise as those she makes with the spoon. The helper checks the roasting tray. Already the vegetables have begun to hiss, their edges sizzling faintly as the oil takes hold. A thin aroma rises, earthy sweetness mingled with the sharper tang of salt. She turns each piece with the tip of her knife, ensuring they brown evenly, her focus intent but her pace calm, as if the vegetables themselves will tell her when they are ready. The loaves in the oven are nearly done now. Their crusts have deepened into shades of brown and gold, some cracked at the top where steam has forced its way out. The smell has grown stronger, filling not just the kitchen but pressing outward through the very walls of the inn. The air is thick with it, and even the cat lifts its nose, sniffing with a low rumble of approval, before settling back down by the hearth. The stew, the bread, the vegetables, the cheese, all these elements work together now, each releasing its own sound, its own scent, each motion tending to them, creating a harmony richer than words. The kitchen hums with fullness, not hurried, not frantic, but alive in the steady certainty of food reaching its moment of readiness. The stew has thickened to perfection, its surface glossy, every bubble releasing a breath of savoury fragrance. The meat has softened into tender pieces, the vegetables glisten with their absorbed flavour, and the herbs, though faded in colour, have given their essence to the broth. The innkeeper removes the bundle with her spoon, sets it aside and stirs slowly, satisfied by the rich weight of the ladle as it moves through the pot. From the oven the loaves are drawn forth, their crusts firm and golden, singing softly as they cool. The faint crackle of cooling bread is like the whisper of paper, a delicate sound that speaks of their readiness. When the helper cuts into one, the crust yields with a sharp crunch, revealing a cloud of steam and a soft, airy crumb within. The scent is overwhelming, warm, yeasty, and sweet, the very smell of comfort. She slices the loaf into even portions, each wedge releasing more of its fragrance into the kitchen air. The roasting tray is lifted from near the fire, its contents glistening in golden hues. The carrots and parsnips are browned at the edges, their surfaces caramelized to sweetness, while the centres remain soft. The oil has bubbled and settled, leaving a sheen across the tray. The helper turns each piece with care, arranging them neatly on a wooden platter, their colours vivid and inviting. The bowl of cheese shavings is ready, bright curls resting atop the greens that wait to be tossed. A small dish of butter is pressed into smooth ridges, the surface pale and gleaming in the light. The jars of jam and preserves, wiped clean and tidy, are set beside the bread. Everything has been tended to, arranged and readied, no longer raw ingredients or half-finished tasks, but finished offerings, each carrying the mark of care. The hearth, too, reflects this readiness. The flames have calmed into a steady glow, no longer crackling wildly, but holding the pot in a steady embrace. The heat is strong but balanced, perfect for keeping food warm until it leaves the kitchen. The fire no longer demands attention. It sustains quietly, its work nearly complete. The helper wipes the counter with a fresh cloth, smoothing the surface before placing the platters upon it. Bread, stew, roasted roots, greens, cheese. Each dish rests in its place, steam rising gently, scents weaving together into a harmony of abundance. The sight of them lined together is enough to make the heart feel full before a single bite is taken. The innkeeper steps back, hands on her apron, and surveys the table. A small nod passes between her and the helper, wordless but certain. Everything has reached its moment of readiness. The kitchen has done its work, and now the meal waits to be carried into the world beyond its walls. The innkeeper ladles the stew into deep clay bowls, the thick broth cascading with a gentle weight, chunks of meat and vegetables settling warmly into each portion. Steam rises in soft curls, carrying the fragrance of herbs and slow cooking into the air. She wipes the rims with a clean cloth, ensuring each bowl is neat, then sets them in a neat row on the counter. The helper slices the fresh bread into thick wedges, their crust crackling beneath the knife. She places 2 slices at the side of each bowl, balancing them carefully so the steam does not dampen the crust. The butter dish is placed nearby, its pale ridges catching the light, ready for guests to spread across the warm bread. A platter of roasted roots is arranged next, the carrots and parsnips browned and glistening. She tucks sprigs of parsley between them for colour, then lifts the tray onto the counter beside the stew. The greens tossed with curls of cheese are placed last, their leaves bright against the wood. Together the dishes form a small banquet, modest in kind but abundant in presence. The innkeeper loads the first tray, steadying it with her palm. She lifts it smoothly, her steps firm as she passes through the door into the dining room. At once the murmur of voices grows clearer. Chairs scraping against floorboards, the shuffle of boots, the low tones of conversation rising with expectation. The tray is set at the first table, and bowls are distributed one by one. The guests lean forward, the steam fogging their faces briefly as they draw in the scent. Quiet. Thanks are murmured, and spoons sink into the hearty broth. Back in the kitchen, the helper arranges the second tray. She places bowls of stew, slices of bread, and a dish of roasted roots side by side, the weight balanced perfectly. She carries it out, her steps careful but practiced, the door swinging behind her. More voices greet her, the soft laughter of a traveller, the words of a child eager for bread, the deep sigh of satisfaction as a guest tastes the first spoonful. Trays move in and out in rhythm, the kitchen filling them, the dining room emptying them. Each time the innkeeper returns, the tray carries only empty mugs, crumb-strewn plates, and bowls scraped nearly clean. These are set near the basin, where they wait until the rush has passed. For now, the focus remains outward, on filling the room beyond with food and warmth. The fire keeps steady, cradling the pot. The bread cools slowly, loaves wrapped once more in their cloth. The roasted roots are replenished, the greens tossed again with fresh cheese. Every time the door opens, the mingled scents of stew, bread, and roasting drift outward, weaving themselves into the voices of the guests. The dining room hums now with quiet fullness. Conversation is gentler, words spoken between spoonfuls and bites of bread. The clink of cutlery and mugs forms its own background music, softened by the wooden walls and the fire's glow. The kitchen, though busy, carries no strain. Only the steady satisfaction of labour flowing into service, care passing from hands to mouths, work becoming comfort. The innkeeper places one last tray upon the counter, her hands smoothing the cloth that lines it. She and the helper exchange a glance, not hurried, not weary, but content. The kitchen's bounty has reached its destination. The guests are fed, the room beyond alive with warmth, and the heart of the inn beats steadily, nourished by the work of fire, food, and care. The innkeeper steadies another tray on her arm, the bowls of stew shimmering in their steam. She steps through the door, and the dining room greets her with its chorus, the shuffle of boots beneath tables, the scrape of spoons against clay, the rise and fall of voices softened by satisfaction. She places the bowls before waiting hands, nods at murmured thanks, and gathers up the empties left behind. Mugs with a ring of tea at the bottom, plates dusted with crumbs, spoons lying forgotten. These she stacks neatly before turning back into the kitchen. The helper meets her at the door, lifting the returned dishes and setting them near the basin. The clink of crockery joins the kitchen's rhythm, not harsh, but measured, each sound softened by wood and cloth. She wipes the rims of new bowls, lays slices of bread beside them, and begins to fill the next tray. Her movements are quick, yet never hurried, guided by the practiced cadence of many mornings past. The guests' voices drift in each time the door opens. A laugh from the corner where a group of travellers trade stories, a child's delighted exclamation as she dips her bread into the stew, the low murmur of two farmers speaking of weather and crops. These sounds mingle with the aromas carried outward. Herbs, roasting roots, the sharp edge of cheese, the earthy richness of the broth. The innkeeper returns with another tray, this one bearing roasted vegetables and a platter of apples sliced thin. The tray is laid at the centre of a long table, and eager hands reach out plucking carrots browned at the edge, wedges of apple gleaming in the light. The chatter grows warmer here, punctuated by the crunch of bites and the scrape of knives spreading butter on bread. In the kitchen, the helper collects bowls that have come back scraped nearly clean, traces of broth clinging to their sides. She rinses them quickly, leaving them stacked in a neat line to be scrubbed fully once the rush has passed. The sound of water against clay is soothing, a softer counterpoint to the clatter of trays. The cycle continues smooth and unbroken, trays prepared, trays carried out, trays returned. The innkeeper and helper move around one another like dancers, each step anticipated, each hand ready to meet the other's work. There are no words needed, only nods, glances, and the certainty of shared rhythm. Guests grow fuller, their voices softening into the tones of contentment. Spoons scrape the last from bowls, mugs are drained and set down with small thuds, laughter settles into low chuckles. The innkeeper notices these signs as she sets down the last tray. The slowing appetite, the easing of voices, the way shoulders lean back from the table. She smiles faintly to herself, knowing the peak has passed but choosing to let the kitchen hold its steady pace a while longer. The cat slips through the open door into the dining room, tail high, weaving between the benches. A few hands reach down to scratch its ears. A child offers it a piece of crust, which it accepts daintily before padding back toward the warmth of the kitchen. Its presence softens the room further, a reminder of the simple comforts shared between hearth, food, and companionship. Back at the counter, the helper places the final bowls of stew on a tray. The broth is thicker now, reduced from its long simmer, darker in colour but still fragrant. She arranges them neatly, wipes her hands on her apron, and watches as the innkeeper carries them through the door once more. For a moment, the kitchen stands in a brief pause, shelves tidy, counters clear, the air heavy with the fragrance of food that has fulfilled its purpose. The dining room has settled into a warm, humming fullness. Guests lean closer to their bowls, spoons dipping and rising with a slow, steady cadence. The stew is thick enough now that it clings to the spoons, rich with the softened carrots and tender meat. Each bite releases steam against their faces, a fragrant warmth that draws small sighs of satisfaction. Between spoonfuls, bread is torn into pieces, dipped into the broth, and eaten with quiet relish. At one table, a farmer leans back, buttering a thick slice of bread with deliberate strokes. He sets the knife down, presses the bread between his palms for a moment to feel the warmth, then takes a bite, closing his eyes as though to savour the comfort. Across from him, a pair of travellers share roasted roots, sliding the tray closer and trading comments in low voices. Their laughter is hushed, softened by the food in their mouths, by the atmosphere that asks for calm rather than clamour. A child at the end of the bench dips her bread into her stew, watching the broth soak through the crust. She giggles softly as the bread begins to crumble, then pops the soggy piece into her mouth, delight shining on her face. Her mother places a hand on her shoulder, smiling without rebuke, for the meal itself encourages ease and gentleness. The innkeeper moves between tables with her trays, her step steady and practiced. She sets down bowls with a nod, lifts empties without fuss, and listens with one ear to the quiet thanks offered in return. Her presence is unobtrusive, yet the guests relax at her passing, assured that their needs are tended to without being spoken aloud. In the kitchen, the helper scrapes the last bit of stew into bowls, her ladle heavy now as the pot runs low. She pauses once, listening to the steady clink and scrape of spoons from the dining room, the sound faint but constant through the doorway. It reassures her, proof that the meal has found its mark, that the labour of chopping, stirring and tending has transformed into warmth on the tongue and comfort in the body. She slices more bread, the crust shattering softly under the knife, and arranges the pieces on a plate. A smear of butter is added, then a small dish of jam, the spoon left inside for guests to help themselves. She places the plate on the next tray, its simplicity balanced by its abundance. Each tray, no matter how small, carries not just food, but the quiet care of the kitchen itself. The cycle continues, trays leaving full, returning lighter. Empties come back bearing only crumbs and streaks of jam across their surfaces. Spoons rest in bowls, abandon mid-clink once their work is done. The helper stacks them neatly, wipes them down quickly, and sets them aside for washing. Her motions are light, her mind already half in the rhythm of the next tray. The dining room hums with low voices softened by food. Conversation has lost its sharper edges. Words are drawn out, spoken between mouthfuls, often punctuated by the slow sip of tea or a satisfied sigh. The room is not silent, but it is restful, filled with the kind of talk that asks for no answer, only presence. The cat has claimed its spot under a bench, curling at the boots of a guest who strokes its fur with absent-minded gentleness. It purrs, a steady undercurrent that threads itself beneath the voices, the clatter and the steady rhythm of the kitchen. Its contentment is as much a part of the meal as the bread and stew. The kitchen remains the heart of it all. Bowls steaming, bread stacked, trays balanced and carried out. No gesture is hurried, no sound harsh. Every motion feeds into the harmony. The scrape of a knife, the bubbling of the pot, the rustle of cloth, the quiet clink of crockery. The guests savour their food slowly, and the kitchen meets them at that pace, a steady current of care flowing outward without pause. The bowls return lighter now, most scraped clean, some with only a thin film of broth clinging to their sides. The helper stacks them neatly at the basin, the clay clinking in muted tones as one rests atop another. She wipes a spoon, then another, the motion slower now, less pressed by the rush. Each cleaned piece is placed upside down to dry, their rims catching the sunlight that drifts through the shutters. The bread basket is nearly empty, just a few crusts left beneath the folded cloth. The helper lifts the cloth, gathers the remaining pieces, and places them on a small plate for any guest who lingers. The jam jars are resealed, their sticky rims wiped clean, their bright colours dulled now that the lids are back in place. They are returned to their shelf where they sit in tidy rows waiting for the next meal. In the dining room, voices soften further. Laughter, once bright, now fades into low murmurs. Guests push their bowls aside, leaning back with hands folded over full stomachs. A traveller rubs the sleep from his eyes, contentment sinking into drowsiness. A child, cheeks pink from warmth and food, rests her head against her mother's arm, her spoon forgotten on the table. The innkeeper gathers the last trays, her movements unhurried. She collects mugs with the dregs of tea, plates dotted with crumbs, spoons resting at odd angles. Each item is stacked carefully, never clattering, each gesture quiet enough to blend with the fading voices. She returns them to the kitchen, where the helper takes them up, rinsing and wiping, the rhythm now gentle rather than brisk. The fire has calmed, its earlier roar softened to a quiet glow. The stew pot nearly empty rests to the side, a thin wisp of steam still rising from its surface. The roasted tray has been cleared, only a sheen of oil left behind. The oven door is closed now, its warmth ebbing slowly. The bread within all gone to the tables. The kitchen breathes with the slow pulse of embers rather than flames, steady and sustaining but no longer urgent. Guests begin to rise. Chairs scrape softly against the floor as they push back from the tables. Coins clink onto the wood as payments are left discreetly, voices offering thanks in tones hushed by the weight of contentment. A few linger, finishing the last of their bread or sipping tea, but even these do so quietly, their words few, their motions slow. The cat returns to the hearth, stretching its body long before curling once more on the warm stone. It purrs faintly, eyes half closed, the perfect echo of the inn's mood, not silent, but restful, heavy with satisfaction. The innkeeper unties her apron and hangs it on its peg, smoothing its folds with her hand. She stands for a moment, looking over the counter. Bowls cleaned, bread gone, jars sealed, platters stacked. Everything has found its place again. The helper pours out the last basin of water, the splash muffled by distance, and returns with an empty bucket, setting it gently down as if marking the pause between meals. The dining room quiets into stillness, the last murmurs fading into the faint sounds of the village outside. The kitchen, its work complete, drifts into the calm of afternoon, holding the lingering sense of bread, herbs, and smoke as a memory of the labour just past. The kitchen now feels hollowed, as though the rush of voices and movement has left an echo behind. The sunlight has shifted higher, falling in softer patches across the floor, warming the flagstones where the cat sleeps in a coil of fur. Its purr has stilled into the slow rhythm of sleep, chest rising and falling like a clock marking time. At the basin, the helper scrubs the last of the bowls with gentle care. The water is cooler now, its surface dappled with bits of foam and a few crumbs. She rinses each piece until the clay is clean, stacking them neatly to dry. The sound of dripping water is faint in the quiet room, each drop echoing before it fades into silence. When the basin is empty, she tips the water into the bucket and carries it to the back step, the splash outside faint and final. The innkeeper moves slowly about the shelves, checking jars and crocks, making sure lids are secure and cloths tied firmly. She smooths the folded edges of sacks, pats them gently as if in reassurance, then adjusts them so they lean upright against the wall. These motions are less about necessity now, more about order, small rituals that settle the space into calm. The hearth has quieted further, embers glowing beneath a fine coat of ash. The stew pot sits off to the side, empty but still warm to the touch. The roasting tray has been cleaned and dried, its surface catching the glint of sunlight as it rests on the counter. The fire no longer demands tending, only the occasional nudge of the poker to keep its low warmth alive. The helper fetches a bundle of herbs from the pegs and begins to strip their leaves, dropping them into a small bowl. Thyme, parsley, and rosemary release their fragrance into the air, subtle but fresh, as her fingers work patiently. She hums softly, the tune barely audible, but it fills the quiet with a thread of life. The innkeeper listens without comment, her own hands busy folding clean cloths into neat stacks. A few tasks linger: apples to be polished, flour to be measured for the next baking, butter to be pressed into its crock. Each is done slowly, carefully, not out of urgency, but out of the steady rhythm of keeping house. The cat stirs at the sound of apples being set onto the table, blinking once before lowering its head again. Even the smallest sounds feel larger now. The hollow thud of fruit against wood, the scrape of a chair being drawn back, the whisper of cloth across the counter. When the last cloth is folded and the last herb leaf stripped, the helper wipes her hands on her apron and sits for a moment at the table. The innkeeper joins her, lowering herself with a soft sigh. They do not speak. The silence is companionable, filled only by the faint crackle of ash and the distant creak of timbers in the rafters. Their hands rest on the table, still for the first time since morning, their bodies leaning slightly toward rest. The sunlight has softened, no longer sharp but diffused, filling the room with a golden haze. The air smells of cooled bread, faint herbs, and smoke that has thinned into sweetness. The kitchen has folded itself into stillness, every task completed, every sound subdued. It holds the weight of labour behind it and the promise of work ahead, but for now it simply breathes, quiet, steady, at peace in the heart of the afternoon. The kitchen has rested long enough that even the air feels different. Cooler, calmer, touched with the faint dampness of shadows beginning to lengthen outside. The cat stirs first, stretching itself out across the flagstones before padding toward the door, ears pricked as if it senses the world beyond shifting toward dusk. The innkeeper rises from the table and unties a clean apron, knotting it firmly around her waist. Her movements are slower than in the morning, less pressed, but they carry the certainty of beginning again. She moves to the shelves, selecting jars with quiet precision. Dried peas in one, barley in another. Each jar is set down with a hollow sound, their weight promising the body of the next stew. The helper brings in a fresh bucket of water from the well, the metal handle clinking softly against its sides. She pours some into the basin, the rest into the great pot at the hearth, where it sloshes against the iron with a deep, steady note. The hearth fire, banked low all afternoon, is stirred with the poker until the embers flare red. She lays a few sticks of kindling, then a log, and the flames rise once more, brightening the room with their steady dance. The innkeeper checks the larder, returning with a cut of cured meat wrapped in cloth. She sets it on the counter, unwrapping it carefully. The knife glides through with a soft scrape, slicing it into neat cubes. The scent is salty and rich, sharper than the fresh meat of the morning, a flavour meant to carry strength into the night. Each piece falls with a soft thud into the waiting bowl. The helper peels root vegetables as turnips this time, their skins curling into ribbons that fall into a small pile on the table. She chops them into steady chunks, the knife tapping softly in rhythm. Alongside them she slices leeks, their pale rings scattering into a dish, their scent green and sharp, promising a brightness against the heavier flavours of meat and barley. The pot accepts its first offerings, barley poured in with a rush like dry sand, peas pattering against the iron, water stirred until it clouds faintly with starch. The innkeeper adds a pinch of salt, then leans on the long spoon, watching the first bubbles rise as the fire takes hold. The afternoon quiet is not gone, but it has shifted. The sounds are sharper now. Knife against board, fire against wood, water against iron. Each carries further in the hushed room, as though the kitchen itself is aware that the stillness of the afternoon has passed. Evening is not here yet, but it waits close by, and the kitchen is steadying itself to meet it. The helper wipes her hands, then gathers herbs once more, thyme, sage, a bit of marjoram, tying them with twine into a fresh bundle. She lays it beside the pot, ready to be dropped in once the broth deepens. The faint, dry scent of the leaves drifts into the air, a reminder of summer fields now preserved for winter nights. The innkeeper looks around the room, the fire rising, the pot beginning to murmur, the boards lined with cut vegetables, and nods to herself. The pace is still slow, unhurried, but the kitchen has turned its face toward evening. Its rest has ended, its labour begun again, in the quiet certainty of preparing for those who will return hungry when the day gives way to dusk. The fire now burns with full confidence, flames licking high and steady around the iron pot. The barley and peas roll lazily in the broth, each bubble bursting with a deeper plop than before. The cured meat has begun to release its salt, flavour spreading into the water, tinting it golden brown. Steam rises steadily, curling through the rafters, filling the kitchen with warmth that seems to seep into the stone itself. The innkeeper lowers the bundle of herbs into the pot, its tied stems bobbing briefly before sinking beneath the surface. A soft hiss rises as she stirs, the spoon scraping the pot's side, releasing a fragrance of thyme and sage that mingles with the heavier scent of meat. The air thickens with it, familiar and comforting, a promise of the evening to come. The helper kneads fresh dough on the floured board, her palms pressing and folding with slow strength. The dough stretches and resists, then yields, springing back with each push. She shapes it into small rounds this time, meant to bake quickly into crusty rolls. She places them onto a tray, dusting their tops with flour, and slides them into the warmed oven. Almost at once the faint yeasty scent fills the air, mingling with the stew's richness. On the table vegetables gather in neat bowls, chopped turnips, sliced leeks, a dish of carrots saved from earlier, their bright colour a welcome contrast to the pale barley. The helper tips them in stages into the pot, each addition sending up a cloud of steam and a sharper note of fragrance. The stew deepens in tone with every ingredient, shifting from thin and pale to thick and hearty, the kind of meal meant to sustain through the night. Beside the hearth, another pan has been set, this one shallow, its surface greased lightly with butter. Into it go onions, sliced thin, sizzling the moment they meet the heat. Their sharpness softens into sweetness as they turn golden, their fragrance filling every corner of the kitchen. The innkeeper stirs them patiently, coaxing them into softness, then adds them to a dish of beans that has been simmering quietly on a smaller fire. The helper arranges platters on the counter, lining them with clean cloths. She places small bowls of butter, a crock of cheese shavings, and dishes of pickled vegetables along the edge. A jar of apple preserves is opened and spooned into a dish, its amber syrup gleaming in the firelight. The platters are modest but abundant, each carrying variety enough to make the evening table inviting. From the oven, the rolls begin to crackle as their crusts set, a soft snapping sound that whispers through the steady hum of the kitchen. The helper checks them briefly, pulling the tray partway out so the warmth escapes in a wave of fragrant air. The rolls are rising tall, their tops golden, their scent rich and wholesome. She closes the door again, letting the heat finish its work. The stew has thickened now, its surface bubbling with a heavy rhythm. The spoon moves slowly through it, weighted by the meat and grains that swirl in its depths. The innkeeper tastes a spoonful, nods, and adds just a pinch more salt. She stirs again, the motion steady, her face softened by satisfaction. The kitchen hums now with quiet intensity. Fire crackles, bread sings, stew bubbles, onions hiss, knives tap. The air is dense with fragrance, herbs and meat, bread and butter, sweet preserves, and sharp pickles. Trays line the counter once more, each awaiting its share of bowls, bread, and platters. The room has shed its afternoon stillness and found its evening rhythm, full, steady, and alive with the promise of another meal soon to be carried outward. The first tray is filled with steaming bowls of stew, each portion heavy with barley, meat, and tender vegetables. Rolls, just pulled from the oven, are wrapped in cloth to keep their warmth and placed neatly beside the bowls. A small dish of butter completes the arrangement. The innkeeper steadies the tray against her hip and pushes through the door. At once the low murmur of the dining room washes in. Guests have gathered again, their voices roughened by the day's labour or softened by travel. Boots scrape against the wooden floor as they shift on benches, the air carrying with it the faint scent of damp coats and tired horses from outside. Conversation pauses briefly when the food arrives, replaced by the sound of bowls being set down, spoons taken up, and the grateful sigh of the first taste. The helper prepares another tray, this one with roasted vegetables glistening gold, a crock of pickles, and rolls stacked high beneath a folded cloth. She steps into the dining room, greeted by murmured thanks and the eager hands of those who reach to serve themselves. She notes their weariness, shoulders slumped, voices low, and yet sees how their faces lift as the food is placed before them. Back in the kitchen, the stew pot is ladled, again and again, each bowl filled with steaming richness. The counter gleams with platters lined in readiness, cheese curls sprinkled over greens, apples sliced into neat wedges, a dish of preserves set beside them for sweetness. Trays move in rhythm now, out to the dining room heavy with food, back again lighter with empties, then out once more replenished. The innkeeper's steps are firm but unhurried as she carries a tray to a table near the hearth of the dining room. Guests there lean closer, their travel-worn faces softening as the steam curls upward. One man wraps his hands around the bowl, warming them before taking a bite. Another breaks a roll in half, butter melting quickly into its crumb. The hum of voices rises again, stronger now, as food restores both strength and spirit. The helper clears returning trays, stacking mugs still damp with the dregs of ale or tea, bowls streaked with broth, spoons resting inside with the heaviness of use. She wipes each clean with practiced motions, her pace steady, ensuring the counter remains clear for the next round. The clink of crockery, the scrape of bowls, and the muffled thud of trays join the harmony of sounds threading between kitchen and hall. As the meal continues, the dining room takes on a different tone from noon, slower, heavier, filled with the weariness of a day nearly spent. Voices murmur rather than rise, laughter is quieter, and spoons move with more deliberate motions. The kitchen matches this rhythm, keeping its trays full but letting its pace soften, each movement more deliberate, less urgent. The cat, curious again, slips through the door, weaving between benches until it finds a resting place at the foot of a guest chair. A child giggles softly as she strokes its back, her fingers moving gently through its fur. The cat settles, purring faintly, as though it too is part of the evening service. The innkeeper lifts one more tray, glancing around the kitchen, rolls wrapped, vegetables roasted, stew still bubbling though the pot is lower now. She nods once, satisfied, and steps out again into the warm din of the dining room. The kitchen exhales as the door swings shut, then inhales as the helper sets another tray ready to follow. The cycle continues, steady and sure, trays going out heavy, returning light, guests' voices filling, then softening as bellies warm. The kitchen, as always, remains the heart of it. Fire glowing, food flowing, hands moving in practiced harmony, until the evening meal has carried its fullness into every corner of the inn. The trays return lighter now, some bearing only empty mugs with rings of ale at their bottoms, others with bowls streaked by spoons that have scraped them clean. Crumbs scatter across the cloths, and the helper brushes them into her palm, dropping them into the hearth where they flare briefly in the glow of the fire. She stacks the bowls with care, their clay rims clicking softly, the sound subdued against the hush that is beginning to reclaim the room. In the dining hall, voices grow lower. The hum of conversation that filled the space earlier has thinned into small clusters of murmurs. A guest leans back, his head tipped against the wall, lids heavy after a day's travel. Another cradles a mug with both hands, sipping slowly, speaking no more than a word or two to his neighbour. The sharp laughter of earlier has vanished. Only the sound of spoons being set down and benches shifting remains. The innkeeper wipes the counter with long, unhurried strokes, smoothing away flour, stray crumbs, and the sheen of oil left behind from platters. She folds the cloth and hangs it neatly, her motion slow, steady, as if she's already easing herself into rest. Her eyes linger on the stew pot, nearly empty now, its surface bubbling faintly in its final breaths of heat. With a quiet nod, she moves it from the fire and sets it aside. The helper fetches the rolls that remain, their crusts firm and cool now. She wraps them in a cloth, tying the bundle tight, and places it in the cool corner of the room. These will be saved, not wasted, waiting for tomorrow's need. The buttercrock is covered once more, the cheese returned to its shelf, the jars of pickles and preserves sealed and stacked. Each sound, the soft thud of a lid, the rustle of cloth, seems to echo longer in the growing quiet. The fire itself has begun to sink. The logs, spent, collapse inward, sending a faint shower of sparks upward before settling into a bed of glowing coals. Their crackle is softer now, a murmur rather than a roar. The heat that fills the kitchen has changed, no longer urging work forward, but simply holding the night's chill at bay. From the dining room, a final wave of footsteps sounds. Guests push back benches, coins clink onto the table, and murmured thanks drift toward the innkeeper as she moves quietly among them. One by one, the door to the hall swings shut behind them, leaving only a handful of lingering figures, travellers finishing their mugs, a child already drowsing against her mother's shoulder. Soon even these voices fade, carried upstairs or out into the village night. The cat has returned to its place by the hearth, stretched long on the warm stones. Its tail twitches once, then stills, its eyes half closed. Its breathing is deep, steady, as if it too is marking the end of the day. The helper washes the last of the dishes, the sound of water and clay filling the stillness. The innkeeper dries them and stacks them neatly on the shelves. Their movements are unhurried, almost ceremonial, each action a way of closing the day's chapter. The kitchen breathes into stillness again. Trays stacked, shelves in order, cloths folded. The scents of stew and bread linger, softened now, mingling with the faint smoke drifting upward from the embers. Beyond the shutters, the night has drawn close, pressing its cool weight against the walls, but within, the space is warm, orderly, and at peace. The innkeeper takes one last look around, at the fire sinking low, the dishes in their places, the cat at rest. She nods to the helper, who unties her apron and hangs it on its peg. Together they step back from the counter, their hands empty at last. The kitchen, its work complete, holds itself in gentle quiet once more, ready to let the night carry it into rest. The last of the guests have gone upstairs, their footsteps fading along the boards overhead. The dining room lies empty, its benches tucked in, its hearth burning low. Only the kitchen remains lit, the heart of the inn still breathing as the innkeeper and helper see to the final motions of the night. The stew pot, scrubbed and dried, has been placed back on its hook, empty and waiting. Platters, wiped clean, are stacked with their edges aligned. Cloths, folded neatly, rest on the shelf, their faint dampness the only sign of the day's work. The helper wipes the counter one last time, her cloth sweeping in quiet arcs, lifting crumbs that glimmer faintly in the firelight. She shakes them into her palm, then into the hearth, where they vanish with a faint hiss. The innkeeper checks the shutters, pressing them closed against the night air. The iron latch clicks into place, the sound sharp but final, sealing the kitchen in its cocoon of warmth. She glances toward the door, slides the heavy bolt across, and rests her hand there for a breath before stepping back. The sense of enclosure is complete. The world outside left to its darkness, the inn within to its rest. The fire has nearly given out, its flames long gone, leaving only embers beneath a veil of ash. They glow faintly, pulsing red with the rhythm of their last breaths. The innkeeper nudges them together with the poker, not to stir them back into life but to let them settle evenly. A small curl of smoke rises, winding upward into the chimney, carrying with it the scent of charred wood, the day's final exhalation. The helper gathers the stray tools, the broom, the poker, the kettle now empty, and leans them each in their places. She binds the broom's bristles with twine so they will not fray, wipes the poker with a rag to clear its ash, and sets the kettle upside down on the stone to dry. Each gesture is small, deliberate, a closing of one more thread in the day's weave. At the mantel, a single candle remains lit, its flame a steady tongue of gold in the darkened room. The innkeeper lifts the brass snuffer, lowers it gently over the wick, and listens to the faint hiss as the flame vanishes. A thin thread of smoke rises, curling into the rafters, where it dissolves into shadow. Darkness settles soft and complete. Only the faint glow of the embers remains, casting a muted shimmer across the flagstones and the cat curled tightly by the hearth. The creature sleeps deeply now, its purr absent, its breath long and steady, as though it has folded itself into the silence. The women stand for a moment in the stillness, hands resting loosely at their sides, gazing around the room that has been both their labour and their comfort. Nothing more is needed. Everything is in its place. At last they step out softly, their footsteps fading into the inn's deeper quiet. The kitchen holds itself alone now, steeped in shadow and the memory of fire. Every shelf, every dish, every folded cloth rests in perfect order. The silence is rich, layered with the echoes of chopping, stirring, laughter and sighs, sounds that linger like ghosts in the air. It is the silence of completion, the silence of rest, the silence of a house carried fully into night. The embers, once glowing faintly red, have cooled to a soft grey. Only a hidden coal or two pulses with the faintest breath of light, like eyes half closed in sleep. Ash has drifted over them in a thin veil, muffling what little warmth remains. The hearthstones are cold at their edges now, the heat confined to a single circle at the centre. The air holds only the faintest scent of smoke, thin and dry, already beginning to fade into memory. The kitchen is black, save for the muted shimmer of moonlight pressing faintly through the shutters. It falls in narrow beams, cutting thin lines across the floor and the edges of the table. Dust motes drift through those pale streaks, visible only when they catch the light, their movements slow, suspended, like tiny ghosts wandering the air. No footsteps sound above. The guests, the innkeeper, the helper, all have surrendered to sleep. The weight of their presence rests in the timbers of the house, but the rooms themselves are silent, their voices stilled. The beams creak faintly now and then, not with strain, but with the long breath of settling, as though the very bones of the building are exhaling into the night. The cat has curled into a tighter ball by the hearth, its tail wrapped over its nose. Its breathing is slow, deep, a quiet metronome marking the otherwise empty hours. Its ears twitch only once, when the wind presses faintly at the shutters, rattling them with a sigh. But it does not stir. The house has claimed it in its stillness, just as it has claimed everything else. The counter, the shelves, the pegs where aprons hang, all are draped in shadow. Their familiar shapes are present, but softened, blurred by the dark. The jars and crocks no longer gleam. The wooden bowls no longer reflect the firelight. They seem suspended, waiting, as if frozen in a painting. The room feels less like a place of labour now, and more like a memory of itself, hushed and unreachable. Outside the world is equally hushed. No hoofbeats echo on the lane, no voices carry from the village. Even the wind has lowered itself into a faint breath that drifts across the shutters without force. The silence is whole, unbroken, vast. Within it, the kitchen seems to stand outside of time. Hours pass unnoticed, marked only by the slow fading of the last hidden coal, the slow cooling of stone, the slow thickening of the dark. The space exists in a limbo between day and dawn, still waiting untouched. The silence is not empty but full, full of the weight of a long day now finished, full of the echoes of laughter and spoons, fire and footsteps, all folded away into rest. It is the silence of a house that has worked and fed and welcomed, now holding itself in complete stillness, carrying the night with dignity. Here, in these deepest hours, time stretches thin. Nothing moves, nothing calls, nothing asks. The kitchen simply is. A vessel of rest, a keeper of memory, waiting for the faintest grey of dawn to return. The night lingers in its deepest hush, but somewhere far beyond the inn, the sky's already shifting. The stars, once sharp, soften into a pale shimmer as the eastern horizon begins to thin. The moon, silver and quiet, lowers itself toward the trees, surrendering its hold. Inside the kitchen, the blackness begins to ease. The first faint threads of grey press through the shutters, barely enough to mark the edge of the table, but enough to soften the heavy weight of shadow. Dust motes stir once more in the pale light, rising and falling in their slow, drifting dance. The embers long since dulled hold no glow now, only ash, soft and fine, resting in pale mounds upon the hearth. The stones are cold to the touch. The air has grown sharper, touched by the chill that seeps in during the final hours of night. Yet with the faint light comes a promise. Warmth will return, the fire will rise, the kitchen will breathe again. Above, the timbers creak as if in response to the dawn. The house itself seems to rouse, stretching after its long stillness. A faint rustle comes from the upper rooms, a sleeper shifting beneath blankets, a bed frame groaning with the weight of stirring. The silence is not broken, only thinned, softened into a quiet that leans toward waking. The cat moves first. It uncurls from its tight ball, stretches its legs long across the flagstones, and blinks at the grey light slipping through the shutters. It pads silently across the kitchen, tail flicking once, as if sensing the rhythm of the day pulling forward again. Outside, a bird calls, a single note at first, tentative, uncertain. Then another joins, then a third, until the air beyond the shutters fills with faint overlapping song. The village stirs with them. A cartwheel creaks distantly. A door thuds open. The sound of a rooster's crow cuts the fading night. Within the kitchen, the grey light strengthens, shifting from shadowed silver into the first golden tones of morning. The outlines of jars, crocks and shelves sharpen, reclaiming their familiar forms. The table, bare but waiting, gleams faintly where the light strikes its surface. The air, once heavy with sleep, begins to feel lighter, touched with expectancy. Soon the innkeeper will descend, her steps soft on the stairs, apron knotted, hands ready to rekindle the hearth. The helper will follow, carrying water, setting flour, laying out herbs. But for a moment longer, the kitchen holds itself in this tender threshold, no longer night but not yet day, balanced between the hush of rest and the stir of labour. The cycle turns, the silence of midnight yields to the quiet of dawn, and with it the promise of another day's work, another round of warmth, food and fire. The kitchen, faithful heart of the inn, breathes in its first light, steady and waiting to begin again. The innkeeper descends the stairs, her tread measured, still softened by the drowsiness of waking. She carries a bundle of kindling under one arm, a folded apron in the other. The kitchen greets her in grey light and silence, its air cool, its hearth long gone to ash. She sets down the wood, ties on her apron with a practised knot, and kneels at the fireplace. With a poker she clears the bed of ash, scraping gently until the stones beneath reveal themselves. She builds the fire carefully, thin twigs at the base, then small sticks laid in a crisscross, then a log set above to hold the heat. A spark catches, first faint, then brighter, until the twigs glow orange, the flames licking upward with renewed life. Smoke curls softly into the chimney, carrying with it the sharp, fresh scent of new fire. The hearth begins to breathe warmth again, and with it the kitchen stirs. Shadows shift on the walls as the light of flame joins the pale dawn. The innkeeper sets the kettle on its hook, filling it with water from a jug, the splash echoing in the stillness. Soon the first hiss of heating begins, thin and promising. The helper enters with a bucket drawn from the well, her cheeks pink from the cool air outside. She sets it down with a dull thud, then rolls up her sleeves. Flour is measured into a bowl, the dust rising into the air like a faint cloud. glowing briefly in the firelight before it settles. She adds water, works the mixture with her hands until it gathers into dough. Her palms slap and fold, the rhythm steady, the sound filling the room with quiet energy. The innkeeper slices yesterday's saved bread crust into small pieces and drops them into a pan, toasting them gently near the fire. Their edges crisp, releasing a scent that mingles with the sharpness of the smoke. A crock of butter is brought down from the shelf, its lid set aside, its pale surface gleaming faintly in the morning light. Outside the shutters the birdsong grows fuller, joined now by the lowing of cattle in the distance and the clatter of a cartwheel on the lane. The village is waking, and the inn must be ready to meet it. The helper sets the kneaded dough near the hearth to rise, covering it with a cloth. While it rests, she begins chopping onions, their sharp scent filling the air, eyes watering slightly as she works. Carrots and leeks follow, their colours bright against the wooden board. The knife's rhythm builds, tapping softly, marking the kitchen's pulse as firmly as the fire's crackle. The kettle begins to murmur, its lid rattling faintly. The innkeeper lifts it off the hook and pours the steaming water into a pot of oats. She stirs with a long-handled spoon, the mixture thickening slowly, soft plumes of steam curling upward. A sprinkle of dried fruit and a spoon of honey are added, transforming the plain oats into a meal that warms both body and spirit. The firelight now fills the room, joining with the dawn's gold as it presses through the shutters. Together they lift the kitchen out of its cool greyness into warmth and colour once again. The air is alive with scent, smoke and oats, flour and onion, butter and honey. The innkeeper and helper move around one another without words, each step familiar, each gesture anticipated. The room hums with renewal, not hurried, but steady and certain. The kitchen, once steeped in stillness, has taken its first breath of the day, and the cycle of warmth, work, and care begins anew. The dough has risen, its surface smooth and puffed beneath the cloth. The helper lifts it with floured hands, dividing it into rounds. She slides them into the warmed oven, where the heat takes hold quickly, crusts beginning to form. The faint yeasty sweetness thickens in the air, mingling with the oats bubbling steadily in their pot. The innkeeper prepares trays at the counter. Bowls are set in neat rows, each one waiting for its ladle of oats. Small plates are placed beside them, ready for bread, butter, and a smear of honey or jam. Crocks are opened, spoons set inside, cloths folded back from their edges. Every movement carries the quiet anticipation of guests soon to come. The fire glows stronger, logs burning down to a steady bed of heat. The kettle sings gently, its steam curling upward, while the pan of toasted crusts is tipped into a bowl. Their crunch contrasts with the creamy oats, a small touch that adds comfort to the meal. The first guests stir above, footsteps creaking on the stairs. A door opens, voices murmur, and soon the sound of boots against wood grows clearer. The innkeeper ladles steaming oats into the waiting bowls, each portion thick and golden with honey glistening across the surface. The helper sets slices of warm bread on the plates, buttered just enough to melt into the crumb. The door opens and the first guests arrive. A farmer with broad shoulders rubs the sleep from his eyes, lowering himself onto a bench. A pair of travellers follow, their cloaks still damp with morning dew. They breathe in deeply as the trays are set before them, their weariness lifting slightly at the sight of steam rising from bowls and bread. The helper carries the first tray into the dining room, the bowls balanced carefully, the bread stacked neatly. She places them down, and murmured thanks greet her. The guests lean forward at once, spoons dipping into oats, butter spread onto bread still warm from the oven. The low murmur of satisfaction begins, the room filling slowly with voices softened by food. Back in the kitchen, the innkeeper prepares the next tray. More bowls, more bread, another dish of jam opened and spooned out. The helper returns with empties already, mugs drained, plates with only crumbs. She wipes them quickly, stacks them aside, and sets fresh plates in their place. The rhythm builds, not rushed but steady, each tray flowing outward as the dining room grows fuller. The air is alive now with layered scents, oats sweetened with honey, bread warm and yeasty, butter softening on its surface, onions already simmering for the next pot of stew. Smoke from the fire threads through it all, carrying warmth into every corner of the room. The voices in the dining hall swell, laughter rising in places, the scrape of spoons against bowls, the crunch of toasted crusts breaking between teeth. The inn hums again with life, its morning once more in full stride. The cat slips quietly between benches, tail high, rewarded here with a scratch behind the ears, there with a morsel of bread. Its purr threads beneath the voices, soft but constant, part of the inn's pulse as much as the fire or the trays moving in and out. The kitchen is at its height again, bowls steaming, bread sliced, trays lifted and returned. The rhythm is unbroken, familiar, a song the inn has sung countless mornings before. From silence to flame, from rest to bustle, the cycle has carried itself forward once more, and the heart of the inn beats steady in the fullness of a new day. The bowls begin to return lighter now, their bottoms scraped clean with the last drag of spoons. Some carry only a smear of honey clinging at the edge, others a crust of bread left untouched, softened by steam. The helper gathers them with careful hands, stacking them neatly at the basin. The water there ripples with each bowl set down, its surface clouding with oats and crumbs as she begins to rinse. In the dining room, voices that swelled just minutes ago have begun to thin. The laughter of travellers has softened into quiet talk, stories traded in lower tones. A farmer drains the last of his mug and rises with a stretch, the scrape of his boots loud in the hush that follows. A child, cheek still flushed from food, leans against her mother's arm, eyelids heavy. The clink of spoons grows rarer, replaced by the sound of benches being pushed back, coins placed on wood, and thanks spoken in murmurs. Back at the hearth, the oats are nearly gone, the pot's bottom showing through with each turn of the spoon. The innkeeper stirs once more, then sets the ladle aside. She lifts the pot from the hook and places it off the fire, its steam fading into the air. The rolls, too, have dwindled. Only a few remain cooling under the cloth, their crusts no longer singing but firm in their silence. These she gathers, wrapping them carefully for later. The fire, which had burned so bright in the early bustle, now glows with a steadier lower flame. Logs collapse inward, the crackle less urgent, the heat less fierce. It no longer drives the kitchen forward but simply sustains a warm presence. The kettle hums faintly, though it too is nearly empty. The helper wipes down the counter, her cloth sweeping away crumbs of bread, streaks of butter, and specks of flour. She smooths the wood with long strokes, her pace unhurried now, the rush behind her. Bowls, rinsed and scrubbed, gleam damply as she stacks them upside down, their rims catching the morning light that presses stronger through the shutters. The innkeeper moves through the dining room, collecting the last of the trays, her steps slow, no longer hurried by guests' calls. She accepts coins with quiet nods, receives thanks with a gentle word, then carries the empties back into the kitchen. When she sets them down, the sound is subdued, blending into the calm that is slowly reclaiming the room. One by one, the guests depart. The door swings open, letting in the cool brightness of morning, then closes again, leaving behind a quieter hum each time. Soon only faint voices remain, the last stragglers sipping their tea in silence. The dining hall begins to echo again, benches empty, the air less crowded with heat and breath. The cat, having collected its share of crumbs, curls itself back near the hearth, paws tucked beneath its chest. Its eyes droop shut, ears twitching faintly at the soft clatter of a dish being put away. The rhythm of the room has changed, no longer pulsing outward, but folding inward, ready to return to stillness. The kitchen exhales, bowls cleaned, cloths folded, shelves in order. The scents of honey, oats and bread linger faintly, sweet but subdued, fading slowly into the background. The bustling chorus of morning has passed, and in its place remains only the low murmur of a house finding calm once more. And so the kitchen, after its steady rise through dawn, its swell into bustle, and its easing into quiet once more, finds itself at rest. The day's rhythms, fire built and banked, bread baked and broken, stews stirred and savoured, linger only in scents and echoes that soften into memory. Within its walls time feels circular, each cycle of labour folding into stillness, each stillness opening again into labour. The hearth will be stoked, the tables filled, the trays carried out again in their turn, but for now the kitchen breathes in calm, keeper of warmth and witness to the simple, sustaining rituals of life. And as the kitchen settles into its calm, let your own thoughts quiet too. The hearth's glow fades, the house grows still, and and the world softens into peace. You may drift now, like the inn at rest, into the gentle rhythm of sleep.